Many people from Europe have very good friends there. Eric Diesenbacher, you know him? Eric Diesenbacher? Well,
yeah, Eric is not famous.
I don't know.
Yeah, not one partner.
Well, let's start with this slot. Today we are going to focus on the economic module of William, as you know. I'm going to present the first session. My name is Iñaki Arto. I'm a professor at the Faculty for Climate Change. And I will be supporting during this module with Paola Lopez, that is PhD candidate from the University of Valladolid, and Guillermo Oben, that is postdoc researcher at the University of Pisa. I have here our email, so feel free to contact us in case you have any questions or clarifications or whatever. And during this presentation, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to interrupt me and ask whatever you want. Okay, feel free. I would like to be this session a kind of dynamic, okay. So what is the objective of the presentation? To highlight this. Well, the objective basically is to provide an overall overview of the economic module of William and its different submodules, because the module is quite big and it has different modules representing the different parts of the economy, the different agents of the economy. And it's going to be split into 3 sessions. In the first session, I will introduce the different submodules. I will show you the structure, I will show you the equations. On top of the equations, that sometimes is quite hard to follow, I will show some kind of flow charts that show the relation between the different variables of the submodules. And after this session, and after the coffee break, Paola will show how the model looking in benzene. And we will go through the different views of the model, that more or less every submodule of the economic model has its own view. We will go through the different views of benzene. And then after the lunch break, Guillermo, and also with the support of Paola and myself, will present this will chair this hands-on session, in which we will try to build a macroeconomic model in benzene. Okay, so we will start from scratch, and we will write the equations in benzene. We will introduce the data, and we will try to do some simulations. So probably you already know this because you have already been introduced to the world of the integrated assessment models. But as you know, the integrated assessment models have just tools, those are mathematical tools, I would say, that are used to understand how the socioeconomic systems affect the environmental system and vice versa. The idea is what we know that human systems have implications in terms of coordination, in terms of use of resources, pollution, etc. And on top of that, on the harm that we are causing in the environment has implications for the socioeconomic system. Climate change has an impact in the socioeconomic system, pollution as well, or resource depletion has got implications in the economic system. I would like to highlight the word of integrated here in the name of the models. And integrated means that it combines different areas of knowledge. You know that here in LOCOMOTION there are many people from different fields, and we are contributing to develop the model. And the idea is that basically we mix people coming from the socioeconomic sciences together with people coming from the earth and engineering, and environmental sciences in order to build a kind of integrated system, integrated model of the whole system with different submodels that are interrelated between them. In some integrated models, they are more integrated, and in other models, they are less integrated. For instance, in William, I would say that it is the model that is most integrated in the panorama of the integrated assessment models. Others are more linear. Linear means that you have the starting point is the society, population, and GDP. Then you have demand for resources, then you have pollution, and then you have temperature increase, and that's it. Some of them they have a feedback between temperature and economy, or they don't have a feedback. Some of them have also, so most of them do not have feedback between external resources scarcity and the economy. So there are many different models. And why is important to in these integrated models the part of the economy? Because they are integrated, they have the social part, the socio-demographic part, the economic part, and also the environmental part. And why the economic part is relevant in these integrated models? Because the economic activities are key to understand environmental degradation. Why? Basically, if you look at any economic activity, the process of production of any good or services, you can follow the global value chain of whatever a product that you can think, and you will see that it starts with the extraction of resources, mining of any material, or extracting materials from agriculture, forestry, fishing, etc. These resources are transformed into products and services that are transported around the world, etc. And finally, they go to the consumption. This is basic economic activity. You have, on top of that, you have market, you have many other things, but the key elements of the economic process are this one: extraction of resources, transformation, and consumption. And during all these phases, what you have is linkage to the nature. In terms of, for instance, here you have use of resources that can create depletion and also environmental degradation. You have generation of waste and emissions, and all of this can create environmental degradation, can create damage in the ecosystem services, and can create biodiversity loss, and many other things. And all these things affect the economic system as well. Some key ideas that are underlying the approach of William in general, not only the economic model, but in general. First of all, one key idea, the expansion of the mass consumption society is at the heart of environmental degradation. So all the environmental problems that we have facing now, climate change, acidification of oceans, biodiversity loss, are pretty much related or ultimately related to mass consumption. The idea is, well, consumption creates production, production creates extraction, and all these processes create a degradation and depletion of resources. So, since consumption is at the heart of all the environmental degradation, we are going to put an accent to the consumption part of the economic system. We will see later. The other thing is that, well, in William we are working a lot, or in LOCOMOTION, about global environmental challenges, but we are also we are also very much interested in other societal challenges, like inequality and poverty. And to some extent, this inequality and poverty are also a result of the current economic system that is basically capital accumulation and asymmetric distribution of income is generating this. So we are also very much worried about how income is distributed across households and between regions and within regions. So this is another thing that is very important, and this is also part of this is the reason that we will see later that we have many different regions in William, and also we have many different types of households, because we are interested in what are the implications of both business as usual scenario with climate change and environmental degradation, which is the implication for different households and for different countries, and also the policies that we are going to deploy to cope with these problems, like any climate policies, like carbon taxes or whatever you can think, efficiency buildings or whatever, how this affects different type of households, and what are the implications of those policies for inequality and poverty. And the other key idea is that the current economic system is not sustainable. And since it's not sustainable, we will have to first to capture with the model why it is not sustainable now and in the future, and then the model must be ready to simulate which alternative pathway for the future we have in the economic system that can correct this situation and go to a sustainable future. Well, in this context, what are the objectives of the economic model of William? First of all, the first objective is to represent the economic system and the link with the other modules of the other spheres of the global socio-ecological systems, in particular with the societal, material, and environmental spheres. And in this case, you will see that there are many feedbacks between the economic module and with the other modules, like the population, with the societal module. The evolution of the income per capita affects fertility, for example, and that affects demography. Demography affects labor force, and labor force affects the economic model. Okay, that's one example. And in the case of the economic system with the material, we see that due to the economic activities, we are demanding resources to oil. We are demanding copper, we are demanding oil, etc. And that has depending on the situation of the extraction and the demand, the supply and the demand, that has implications in terms of prices, and those prices feed back to the economy, and the economy reacts to those prices. We have scarcity, prices go up, and it will have a different impact in the different countries and in the different households. Probably rich people can afford that increase in oil, but poor people cannot, and they will reduce the demand, and that will have an impact as well. So this is the type of, and the same for environment. If we demand more fossil fuels for running the economic system, that will generate emissions. These emissions will generate climate change. Climate change will generate increasing temperature. Increasing temperature will generate damages in the economy, and that affects the economic system. It will affect the stock of dwellings of the households. Will affect the productivity of the companies, the industries, or the productivity of labor, and that has impacts in the economic system. So it's highly integrated, I would say. The second objective is to understand the relation between the economic activity and the global societal challenges. So global societal challenges, I'm referring to all the environmental challenges that I mentioned before, climate change, resource depletion, etc., pollution. And in terms of social challenges, I would say that the most relevant one for us is the income inequality and poverty. Not only, but that's one of the more relevant social challenge. And last but not least, the third objective of the model is support the design of alternative futures to cope with these challenges. So it's very policy oriented. We are paying a lot of attention to the design of policies that can reshape these future scenarios. So we see, I think that it is next week, Natalie, we focus together with Stefan, Natasha, yes. Then we focus on how we are thinking on these different futures in terms of policy. How is usually the representation of the economy in integrated assessment models? Have a range of integrated assessment models. Some of them put more attention on the economy, some of them put more attention on the environmental and energy part. And usually, normally, integrated assessment models are classified like in two different categories, more or less. So this is not very as, it's something that is continuous. You can be more up or here in the first category or here, but more or less they are classified into these two categories. Bottom-up models that that they usually have a detailed representation of the energy and environmental systems, but with a very stylized representation of the economy. This, for instance, is the case of the GICA model. This one model that we use at DC3, and it's one of the models that is used by the IPCC in the development of the assessment reports of the emission scenario, etc. They have high detail in the energy and environmental system, a lot of different technologies for transportation, for production, etc., etc. Also, in terms of the environmental system, land use in order to capture land use emission, etc. But the representation of the economy is very stylized. In this case, basically what they have is the GDP is completely exogenous, and it's, together with population, is a driver of the demand of energy and emission, etc. And there is no feedback between the climate change, for instance, and the economy. Okay. On the other hand, you have the top-down models that are mainly macroeconomic models. And here you have normally in some of them you have a detailed representation of the economy. These are multi-sectoral models. This is the typical case of the computable generated models. But in this case, what they have is a very stable representation of the energy and environment. So there is a trade-off between this and this. In some of them, they have also a very stable representation of the economy and very stable representation of the environment. This is the case of the DICE model of Northhouse. So this is more or less what is now outside. And then, obviously, there are other things. But in the case of William, what we have tried to take the best of the two worlds. So we are trying to have a detailed representation of the economy, as you will see later, and also a detailed representation of the energy, materials, and the environment. So this is the approach that we are following. Obviously, you can not cover the whole thing because what you are trying to do is a kind of representation of the model. You cannot have the model in your computer, in your basic model. It's a simplification always. But it is to take at least some key or a kind of a level of desegregation, let's say, that is able to reproduce what is going on without avoiding making a lot of assumptions. Well, let's see, let's go inside the model. What do we have there in the economic model? Well, the core economic module is a dynamic econometric multi-regional input-output model. And this has been extended in order to have endogenous final demand, especially for consumption and gross capital formation, investment, and by mutual feedbacks between quantities and prices. So this is something that is similar to a CGU model, but it is not a CGU model. You will see later why. Because in contrast to CGU models, in the input-output model that we have in William, has some kind of Keynesian features. And this is important. Markets are not generated by the price mechanism. In the computer generated model, you are always in equilibrium. Normally, in some of them you have, but normally you don't have, for instance, unemployment. The idea is that when you have a difference between the supply and demand, prices are going to adjust until the supply is equal to the demand. Here we are taking into account that there are some rigidity, institutional rigidities, for instance, in the labor market, that makes that at some point you are not in equilibrium, that you have unemployment, undesired unemployment. And this is something that we have here. Okay, this means we have prices. I know that you are worried about the prices, so probably.
Let's wait.
But we have prices that we think that it is an important mechanism because prices exist in the real world and we cannot avoid them. And then prices, to some extent, models are very relevant for two things. First, because they are going to allow us to distribute scarcity, especially taking the scarcity, especially in terms of resources. But we have this is something that we are see now in the real economy. We have constraints in the supply of oil and gas in the world, and now we are seeing how the prices are going up. And now we are seeing, for instance, that in some less developed economies, they are suffering a lot because they cannot afford that. And in other economies, we are suffering that also as well. But some households are suffering more than others. We want to capture that. And in order to capture that, we need those prices. The model is also especially designed for integrating feedbacks between the economy and nature, in particular the supply and demand of resources, material, energy, land and water, as well as the feedbacks of climate change to the economy. This we have paid a lot of effort in trying to link what is going on in the economic in terms of the demand of resources, what is going on in the supply in terms of the extraction of resources, availability, etc., the glaciers, etc. And we have put a lot of effort in trying to take on board the impact of climate change in the economy. And also we have feedbacks between the economy and society. I already put the example of how the income affects fertility, etc., etc. We have also migration in the model that to some extent is treated like the income differences between different regions, not only, but it's one of the reasons. And also, yeah, this is more or less part of the feedbacks. And in terms of regions and industry, we have 35 regions, you already know that, 62 industries, sectors, economic and productive sectors, 60 types of different households, and then we have the government. These are the regions that we have. And this is an overview of the flow chart of the model. So we have on top we have the demand, the final demand. We have the households, consumption. We have the government, and we have investment. We have here the fixed production. This is the core of this is the input-output model, but not only. You say that there are more things there. We have also our financial module. Then we have trade, we have imports, and we have exports. And we have also the demand of factors, labor, energy, and intermediates. And we have imports here, and we have price that are affecting the whole system. So these are more or less the elements that I will detail later. I will go through each one, and I will show what is inside the thing. And then we have the links, the bidirectional links between the economic model, society, energy, environment, energy, and materials. So I have, sorry. So in this presentation, I will use the gradient. We see that you have many endogenous variables, and they are squares with different colors depending on the submodule that I'm talking about. For instance, the red ones are referred to the production module, to the input-output module. Therefore, the blue is used for the government, black for capital investment, and this orange for labor, yellow for energy materials, green for consumption, this one for prices, and then we have the orange for finance. The exogenous parameters are those ones. Then we have endogenous variables for econometric equations. The solid colors means links with other models. And then we have interregional links and intra-regional links. This interregional means that they differ between countries, and intra-region is something that is going on within the economy of one of the regions. So I will start with the production block. The core of the production block is a new multi-regional input-output database that we have created for William. William multi-regional input-output table. And this has been done combining the OECD inter-country input-output tables and exogenous database. Okay. Basically, what we have done is take the inter-country input-output table that is produced by the OECD every year, and then in order to we have that table has a problem for us, is that the representation of some of the sector is very aggregated. For instance, we have one only sector that it is a production of electricity, gas, and steam. and we want to have a more detailed representation of that sector. We have to disaggregate that, and the same happened from the mining sector. The mining sector, we wanted to have more different materials like copper, aluminum, in order to work properly with oil. The same we have for transportation. So what we did is take from XIO, we took structures because XIO is an input-output database, but it is more disaggregated.
May I ask a question?
Yes, sure.
How well can you model energy transition? Because energy transition towards renewables will completely change the way economy reacts with the energy sector. Currently, we are running on mostly OPEX based energy sector, but in the future it will be CAPEX. So you need to model some subsectors of production and how you allocate them geographically, because that will have a quite significant impact on the growth of the economy, because the CAPEX part of energy sector will now interact in a completely different way than fossil fuel-based OPEX sector was interacting.
Well, basically, all the energy transition is modeled in the energy module, that is Austrian Energy Agency, and Lucas. And what we do is, well, and I will explain later, but what we do is, from the economic module, depending on the level of the demand of an output of each region and sector, we have a demand for final energy. This final energy is sent to the energy module, and they decide how that is going to be produced. And they decide in which different technologies are they investing, and they decide how this different technology produce. Okay? They give us those numbers, they give us the level of production of each different technology, photovoltaic, nuclear, gas, whatever, and they also provide the inputs of these technologies, whether they are using gas, how much gas, or oil, or whatever, and they are sending to us the investment in the different technologies. And we introduce that into the economic model. And with that, what we capture, for instance, when they tell us, now we are producing more with gas, and we are producing less with gas or more with wind. This is going to have an effect in the input of the structure. You are going to demand less gas from Russia. You are going to reduce your dependency. You are going to reduce your energy bill, and it's going to have an impact, economic impact. But also you are going to invest more in wind, and it has also going to have an impact. You have to produce the wind turbines. You have also to import some of the elements are going to be produced abroad. You have to import them, or they are going to produce at home. And when they operate, they will generate different demand of intermediates, because in the case of gas, you are demanding gas. In the case of wind, you are demanding engineering or maintenance or whatever. So we are capturing all these effects in the model, but the decision of we are investing in this and that is in the energy system, in the energy model.
Okay, that brings me to a second question. We energy modelers would prefer if you supply us with useful energy demand and not final energy demand, because energy efficiency policies are between useful energy and final energy demand.
Yes, you're right. In between economy and energy, there is something that we call the intensities. Because what we produce is in the economy model, we produce the output. We have to produce this number of cars or whatever, or this amount of steel. Okay, and then to produce that, we need energy. We know that we need energy, but we don't know which type of energy and how much energy. And this is something that is computed through the intensities that are calculated bottom up. So in the energy module, they say, well, in order to produce this type of output, this output, or one unit of output in the iron sector, you need this type of this amount of electricity, of liquids, or whatever. This is how it works. And those intensities are modeled bottom up. Some of them, they are more detailed. For instance, we have been discussed lately. It would be interesting to take some specific sector like the iron and steel sector and try to go a bit deeper and try to, but I think that is beyond this project. but it's something that would be very interesting to go into processes. So this part is the part of the multi-regional input-output table. To some extent, we have endogenous technological change, especially the one that is coming from the energy, material, and transport modules. So in the core of in the technology of the different sectors, because in order to produce, the sectors use different type of inputs. People from the input-output were already known this. But this technology changes over time. And especially in our case, we are very interested in how the use of energy changes over time. And this is something that comes from bottom up. This is the energy intensity that I mentioned before, that is computed in the energy model. So they say in the future, the transportation sector, the road transportation sector is going to consume more electricity and less diesel. So we put that into the input-output structure and the same for other sectors. We have also dynamic structure for trade, I was talking yesterday, and to some extent we have also demand-induced technological change. This means that we will do simulations, and in the future people is going to consume different things because they are more rich or they're rich, or because they have changed their behavior, and this is going to trigger technological change in the sense that if you are not consuming diesel, you are not going to have refineries, for example, and this is going to create technological change. Yes?
Do you also have a sector that produces knowledge or education or human capital?
Well, we have the education sector, but the skills and these things are modeled in the socio-demographical module. We have investment functions and capital adjustment mechanisms. As I mentioned before, high integration between materials and energy modules. We have impact of climate change in the stock of capital and labor productivity, that we will explain later. Sorry. And we have a dual price mechanism. Basically, we have a price equation that for non-energy and non-material sector, what we have is for non-material sector, we have that when the supply is greater than the demand, we just take the cost, production cost, and on top of that, we put a markup, and that's it. But then we can have situations when the supply is, so this is what is not going on, for instance, in a CE model, because you will be never in a situation like this, because price will adjust until this is equal to this. So we can have, indeed, we have a spare capacity most of the time. So we are not producing, we have a spare capacity and we have unemployment. But we can have situations, especially due to the supply constraints of resources, situations in which where the demand is lower than the supply. And here, what we have is a market clearing price. So we increase the price until we kill the demand, because we cannot have, we cannot consume more oil than the oil that we are extracting. So we need that mechanism. So this is how it works. Well, in the production module, as I already mentioned, the core is the input-output model that was developed in the 50s by Vasily Leontiev. This is based on input-output tables that are statistical, usually produced by part of the national accounts and are produced by national statistics institutes. And these input-output tables describe the flows of goods and services between the different sectors of the economy and between the sectors and the final users, including export and imports, and also describe the value added that is generated in the different sectors. And they are in monetary units, okay? In million US dollars in the case of 1 million. This is something that is regularly produced by National Statistics Institute, not for all the countries, but for developed countries, for all of them, and for some less developed countries as well. And in some cases, this national input-output can be linked between them, and then you can create a multi-regional input-output database. With those databases, you can track the flows of goods and services between the sectors and the countries of the world. And examples of these databases as XIOS, Bio, Figaro, Eola, and others. These input-output and multi-regional input-output tables are typically using the construction of multi-sectoral economic models, like the computer generic linear model. You have standard static input-output models, dynamic econometric input-output models, etc. So basically, when you see that when you see a multi-sector model, economic model, basically behind that you will have an input-output table or a social accounting matrix that is an input-output table together with more information. But it is what you have there. And as I mentioned before, in William, what we have is that new multi-regional input-output table that has been created combining OECD and XIOS. And this database, this multi-regional input-output is complemented with other information that we use to develop the different models, like data on employment, investment, capital stock, capital stock, government accounts, household accounts, etc., etc., etc. Okay, and this is the sectors that we have in William. I have highlighted the ones that we have split, and that the ones that are linked to other parts of the model. In particular, we have here, normally in this multi-regional input-output table, you have only one sector, that it is agriculture, forestry, and fishing. We have split it into 4. In the case of mining, I think that in the OLPC of database, you have 2 sectors, energy, mining, and non-energy, and we have split that into mining of, we have mining of 4, oil, gas, and other gas, and then we have, this is the fossil fuels, and we have all the metals and the non-metals. We have split the power sector, power and gas sector. You have all these technologies together with this distribution of gas and steam. And we have also disaggregated transportation. And basically, this is the segregation is mainly to proper linkages with the bottom-up models.
Excuse me, Professor.
Yes.
One question here. How do you actually look for the data in this disaggregation? Because the input-output tables basically are disaggregated into 56 sectors.
Yes.
And then different databases are based in different years. For example, Violet is based, the last is released, it was in 2016, about the year from 2014. So which are the base year that you are using?
2015, we took it's the base year of the model, is 2015. And we use the OECD ECL database of 2015, and we use the same year for XIOS. In the case of XIOS, the last year with proper data is 2011, but they have projections. So we use the projection of XIOS of 2015 to split the sectors in the OECD ECL database.
How do you solve the problem of the rigidity of the coefficients? Because if you're using data from 2015 and you are like assessing for years until I don't know how many years.
Yeah. Well, yes. We have for all these sectors, So we have for the rows of this one, all this mining, this one, and this one, for these sectors, basically this is something that it comes from bottom up. The technical coefficients change bottom up. For instance, what you have is that from the energy module, we have the changes in the consumption of electricity to produce iron. That is a change in the technical coefficient of that row, of that sector, of that row. So you take the iron electricity sector, you have the electricity, and you have a number there. This is the energy intensity that changes, because bottom-up sectors, bottom-up models are saying that is changing. The same for transportation. All the sectors are demanding transportation, and they can switch from road to rail. So these are changes in the technical coefficient. And also in the case of transportation, you can have in the repository road that we are using more hydrogen, let's say, and less diesel. So this is something that comes bottom up, and we change the coefficient. And in the terms of the columns, it's exactly the same. If you say me that, well, electricity is not produced more anymore with coal, and it is produced more with solar PVs. So you will have an output of zero of that sector, and you have more output in the other sector. What we are changing is basically the structure of those. We are not changing the structure of all the coefficients. For instance, we are not changing the use of financial services by the chemical industry. We are not changing that. We are just focusing on the technological change related to energy, transportation, the sector that we have. The other are fixed. We have this is a relation of the demand of intermediates, because in the production function we have also demand in labor, capital, etc. And there we have technological change. We have, but it's exogenous. The change, you will say later, the change in labor productivity and capital productivity is something that it is exogenous. But it's with this part of the storyline. I mean,
I need to say,
indeed, in the description of work of the project, the idea was to endogenize the full matrix, and we saw that that was not feasible. Well, in Valladolid they were working on that, and they tried with the physical component approach. I think that it was, and they didn't find any good solution for that. And this is something that it is. In multi-sectoral models, normally you don't have change with the technology. Basically, the A is fixed. I know that it's a problem, especially when you go to 2050. I know it's something that.
Yeah, because one of the main critiques about using input-output tables to forecast for data in the long term is that if you're using coefficients that are so steady, you cannot actually perform what the changes in the different years of the capacity will be.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So in
any case, we are capturing part. We know that it is not perfect, but we are capturing part of the technological change. That it is the one that it is. We are more interested in all that it is related to the energy system. We are capturing that, but for instance, we don't know whether in the future the potato omelets are going to be cooked with 3 or 2 eggs and 2 potatoes or 3. We don't know that. But what we will know is that the potato omelets are going to be cooked with gas or electricity. This is what we know.
A tiny comment on that. Have you tried other base years? Because 2015 was a record low of prices for all of the resources and fossil fuels. So maybe 2012 and 2014 would have given you different coefficients.
Not necessarily, because why the different coefficients?
Because industries would substitute.
Well, it could be the case, but for us that is not important, because what we have is with the physical and monetary world, what we have is for the base year we have a kind of a price, but that is fixed, and it's a kind of a converter between monetary and physical. And for the base year, I don't care whether it is 50 or 200. I don't care, because this is the relation between physical and monetary. The model works in real terms.
Okay, no, I understand. Yeah.
And then when we have, it works in real terms, but we have it in real and in nominal terms, because we need nominal. Part of the model we need in nominal terms. So we have this converted between monetary and physical, and on top of that, we have a price index that converted that into nominal terms. Okay? And this we have that for all the physical part. We have for the base year something that converts monetary to physical. That's it.
Small question more. Why you choose combining OECD file table with the estimate data?
Well, yeah.
Why don't you use the Excel-based file table?
Yes. For instance, Excel has a problem that I already mentioned, that the last year when you trust, or less the data, is 2011. From 2011 onward, that is extrapolation. And indeed, we have been working in a project where we have been comparing real, for instance, figure. You know, figure multi-regional input-output table. Figure is something that is produced by Eurostat. So it's official statistics. So we have compared the database, the figure database of 2015 with the XIONIS of 2015 that it is projected. And the difference in the GDP of some countries is like 20%, just in GDP. So we decided to use, and the problem is with what XIONIS was part of the 7 project, a research project, and that is not supported anymore by any statistical institution. So we decided to go to the OECD database because this is something that it is produced yearly by the OECD, and then try to take the structure of XIOs. In the future, when we update the model, we will take the latest data of OECD and we will do that.
Yeah, what is this line of logic that I've been using XIO for 2015 and I've seen the time series and have you, like you said that you use the OECD, and you combine it with XIO base to disaggregate, but did you like, I don't know how to say this, but trusted the numbers of the XIO base or
Yes.
try to
We close our eyes.
Okay.
No, it's the method that you have. I mean, because doing something, because I mean, we are playing with the structure of XIO base, the disaggregation, this thing, of the, so we are trusting, is indeed, we are using what it is extrapolated to 2015, but it is, I think that it is 2011, that when they did it, so we are playing with that. Of course, they made a lot of assumptions also to do this. Is that better than we can do?
Yeah.
And when we have been working with the numbers and also with the satellite accounts, you know, that we have also materials account there, we have all the strange things, very weird things.
I don't know if, like, what you were saying that when you're working with people such as tables and you're extrapolating, you are making some, like, hard assumptions about technology, but this, with 2011, 2015 already, there are many strange things happening.
Yeah, for instance?
And you could, I cannot say that.
No, I'm sure about that, but the thing is that we are using just the structure of this. So, what we are doing is, for instance, imagine Chile. In Chile, you have the mining sector. I mean, in the OECD database, you have mining. And in Chile, you have a lot of mining of copper and mining of other things. Okay? So what you see in the XIO base is that you have a lot of mining there and less in the other. So it's close to the real thing. Yeah. So it's pretty close. So, and I think that probably in Chile from 2011 and 2015 they are not producing much more aluminium and less copper. We are assuming that they are mining more or less the same. This is what we do.
And where do you take the data from? Because if you're using the satellite account of the tables, you have to send over 56 sectors and not.
We are very lucky that because in PC3 we have hired the guy that did the environmental accounts of XIO, the energy and emission account of XIO. So he is producing for us the energy and emission accounts that are consistent with the balances of the International Energy Agency and with the structure of the database.
That's so cool, because it's the worst part of ever working with double tables is to find data you can trust on or more security.
But for instance, yeah, you're right. But in the case of energy, we trust a lot on that. Not in that the one that we have produced. And in the case of materials, we have found some problems. Also with copper, and also problems with the definition of the barrel. The extraction, the domestic extraction that it is computed as in the satellite accounts of the XIO is different to the extraction that he computes in the materials model, because they are taking more things there in the domestic extraction there. There are differences in the consoles. So in the case of the environmental extensions, we are just producing our own energy accounts, and all the material part comes from the materials model. We are not taking information from materials from the XIO base. Just we are producing energy and emission accounts, and the materials come from there. We are using water accounts. Water, yes, but it's like. Well, I think that probably it's going to be, I will take probably time from your session, Paula.
Sorry?
I will have to take time from your session.
Okay, no worry.
So what else? Well, many people here, I know that this knows something about input-output model, but basically the idea of introducing an input-output model in William is that the input-output model is able to compute the output of the different sectors that is required to satisfy a level of final demand. For instance, one example would be the model can compute the production in all the industry, in the mining, coal, petrol refining, iron and steel, etc., in all the regions in the William model that is required to produce German cars that are sold in Italy. So this is what the input-output model does, translates from final demand to production. And then from production, we can link to other modules, and with this level of production, we can develop the labor module, etc., etc. This is one goal of the model. So the idea is that departing from the final demand and taking into account the technology of the different sectors, the model computes the output of all the reviews. In this sense, again, we have already discussed that, but I would like to highlight that the matrix of technical coefficients is dynamic. In particular, all the coefficients related to the use of primary and final energy that are calculated bottom up, and also the columns from the transportation and for power sector. And this is the equation. Well, I have put everything, or more or less everything in equation and also in flowcharts. So I will share with you the slides, and you want to go in deep, so you can go through the equation, or maybe you are not much interested and you go to the flowchart and everything you have here. So for every region, well, first of all, I will start with the node. We have changed this is not a standard multi-regional input-output model, it's a simplified version to improve the performance of the model in basic. So instead of, for those that are familiar with input-output models, instead of inverting huge multi-regional input-output models, we are inverting the total matrices of each region, and then we calculate the trade. So it's a simplified version, but the result is more or less the same, but with a lag. I will show you how it is done. So we start for each region, for instance, for Spain, and the sector cars, in a year, we calculate the final demand. And this is the sum of the final demand, the domestic final demand, the intermediate exports, and the final exports. In the case of cars, you will have here manufacturing of cars and parts. You will have the final demand of cars. This is the sum of the cars that are sold in Spain, plus the intermediate export of car parts to Germany, plus the final exports of cars to Germany. So this is the final demand, and then we have the LTF inverse. This is the identity matrix minus the technological coefficients, and then we have the output. That is the LTF inverse times the final demand. So this is a standard input-output model. Then we have international data. So we have computed the final demand that is required to the output, here. We have computed the output that is required to satisfy the final demand, but now we want to see where this output is produced, whether it's produced domestically. Not the output, the intermediate outputs that we are using, whether they are produced domestically or they are imported. We will see. So, and for that we use what we call elasticities. This is something that is pretty common in computer generic equilibrium models. You have Hamilton elasticity. In econometric input models you have as well. And basically, what these Hamilton elasticities say is, depending on the difference between the price of domestic goods for the Spanish cars and the price of foreign goods, German cars, depending on this ratio, you produce more cars domestically or you import more from other countries. This is what they say. So first, we compute for each country the part that it's produced domestically or imported. But we don't know whether these imports come from Germany or from, we know that you are producing domestically or imported. And then in a second step, we compute from which country are coming these imports. And to that, what we have is something that is also popular in the economic literature, in trade literature, this is the gravity models, but they are not so common in the econometric model or CG models. And basically, what we say is, well, I know that I'm importing this amount of cars, but now I want to see whether I'm importing those from Germany, or from Poland, or from the United States or India. And in order to see that, we have also econometric estimations in which the origin depends on whether if it's a free trade agreement or not. The different in the price of each country in relative of the price of all the countries. How different is the price of a car in Germany compared to the weighted average price in the world for cars? And also it depends on the size of the exports of each country, of the total export in the world. How relevant is how big is the market share of Germany in the total exports of the world of cars? This is how we split the imports by origin. And this is something that all these parameters we have estimated econometrically in the model. In this case, for instance, for this we use time series of Wyatt and also time series of OECD tables. We compare the results, and for this we use the stepping database. Okay? So once we have these import shares, we can calculate which are the imports, the intermediate and the final imports. The intermediate means import of, for instance, parts of cars or steel, and final means final products, cars. So departing from the output and multiplying by the technology, this is something that has been calculated in the input-output model, the 11th model. We have calculated already the output. We multiply by the technical coefficients, and we have the intermediate demand. The intermediate demand is how much steel is required to produce a car in Germany. How much steel? But we don't know if this steel is imported or domestically produced. In order to see this, we multiply the import shares, the demand, we multiply the import shares and the import shares by origin. And then we have the intermediate imports by origin. So this is what we do. And these imports basically are the exports of others. And these exports enters in the final demand of others. Remember that in the final demand we had the domestic final demand, intermediate exports, and final exports. These are the intermediate exports of the final demand of the other. And for final imports we do the same. We multiply the final demand, import shares, and import by origin. And we have different elasticities depending on whether we are talking about final products or intermediate products. So this is how this is how it looks in terms of flow chart. So the idea is this is the final demand. I didn't mention that, but in the final demand you have changes in inventories, you have the consumption of households, the government consumption, and the investment. Okay, I'm going to share on the slide with you, so don't worry about that. So with this, we have the final demand. Okay, and then this is split between domestic and import. You see the trade shares that we have economically estimated.
I don't know if this is a great question right now, but is there an interaction between the environmental policies and trade? Because keeping, for instance, in the case of Italy, some people argue that introducing a carbon tax would make production in Italy more expensive with respect to other countries that are more advanced in the ecological transition, so it would raise imports and change the composition of trade and increase the leakages.
This is included here.
Okay.
Because in the price of, you include also the taxes.
Okay.
And also in the price of imports, you can include a border tax adjustment, for example. But that is part of the price. So it is included. In some gravity models, they sometimes try to explain carbon leakage putting as a variable whether you have a carbon ETS or not, and these kind of things. They have used that. But in our case, that is captured by the price itself. So we have the final demand. We have the trade shares that depends. This means that these trade shares depend on what I already mentioned, the prices, whether you have a free trade agreement, etc., etc. So you split the domestic and imports. The imports go to the demand of others, and then we have the imports of others that are your exports. Your exports plus the final demand, okay, times the Leontief inverse is the output. And the Leontief inverse depends on the technical coefficients that are fixed for non-energy sectors, etc., and the technical coefficient of energy industries and all the energy commodities that come from the bottom-up models, and also the transportation that is included here. So you have here the output of non-energy industries, because the output of energy industries also comes from bottom-up models. And from this output, you multiply by the technical coefficients, and you have the intermediate demand. And with the intermediate demand, again with the trade share, you split between domestic and imports. And the intermediate imports go to the export for other countries. So this is how it works. This blue line means that this is a national, the input-output model of a country, and then we have the link with the input-output models of other countries. Okay? Yes?
Maybe I lost some parts. What's the source of the price data?
Price data, we have, in this case, for the estimations, Wyatt. The prices of Wyatt. The deflators of Wyatt.
Okay, so it's a global price or?
We have for each industry, we have a price.
It's also based on 2015?
No, it's in the case of Wyatt, what you have, you remember that in Wyatt you have the tables in previous year prices and in nominal prices. In order to pass from nominal to previous year prices, you have a deflator. So that is one in the base year, that I think that it was 2010 or something like that, and then it is changing. 1.1, 1.2, 1. So this is the price that we are using. We don't have this is the price that we use for the estimations, for the econometric estimations. In this, in any case, all the things that that I'm showing here are in the deliverables. We have a deliverable for information and trade, and for labor, etc., etc. Yeah, you can go look from the website. The deliverables that start by 4 point something are the deliverables of the economic model, and everything is described there.
Just to make sure I understand correctly, you use PPP rates as if they were exchange rates?
PYP.
PYP?
Previous year price, not power purchasing parities.
Okay.
PYP. So price indexes to deflate the data.
Right, but you deflate them, you don't have market exchange rates, and there's no impact of finance on the exchange rates or anything?
Exchanging, everything is in million US dollars in the table. So the prices are already there.
Okay. That's a huge.
Well, in this, yeah. Well, a colleague from Visitor is the one that estimated all the Hamilton elasticities and the gravity model. I think that is delivered of 4.2.
Okay. Yeah,
you can check it.
Discuss it.
What else? Well, and on top of this, you have also, in some places, you have also taxes that I will say later that go to the government, etc. We have also from the output, we have the demand of other factors, in particular labor and energy, and also the demand for investment. And then, for instance, we will follow with the labor. So we have here that in order to produce, so this is more or less the input-output loop, the production module, the part of the input-output model of the production module, and then we are going to see what is going on with labor, with energy, and with investment. The labor module. Basically, the labor module captures the relations between the supply of labor that is produced by supplied by the households and the demand by the industries. and compute key variables like the wages, the labor compensation, that is part of the GDP, the employment, and unemployment, etc., etc. And the central part of this labor model is a wage curve, we will say later what it is, that it has been also automatically estimated by LOCOMOTION. And it computes the evolution of the wage per hour in each industry, how much we pay in industry of specific countries, in the car industry in Spain, for 1 hour of work, in relation to other variables. And it has an definition specification in which the wages depend on the consumer price index, the labor productivity, and the unemployment rate. Working hours are not in the equation. And when we have this wage, on top of the wages, the wage curve, we also compute the total labor compensation, multiplying the output that it is coming from the input-output model. We multiply the output. We divide the output by the labor productivity. We have the hours that are required to produce something, and we multiply that by the wages per hour, and we have the labor compensation. So on the total output, we calculate hours, and we multiply the hours by the wage per hour, and we have the total labor compensation. In the case of employment and unemployment, it is calculated by the data of the output that it is coming from the input-output model, with the average working time per worker, that it is exogenous, how many hours each worker works in a year, and the labor force. And the data for the econometric estimations comes from Wyatt, Eurostat, and UCLIPS. And these are the equations. So we start, this is the output, the real terms that we have computed in the input-output model. We divide by the labor productivity, that it is exogenous and evolves according to the different storylines that we have. And we have the hours required to produce this level of output. We have the hours, and we divide by the hours per worker, that is an exogenous variable. Indeed, I think that in the next week, you are going to do something in the policy simulations, and maybe you as well? No?
Yes, today, yes.
Today? Yeah. We are playing with this. We are reducing the working time and looking what is going on, what are the implications. This is exogenous variable. So you divide the hours per worker, the hours worked by the hours per worker, we have the employment. And the unemployment rate is y minus the employment divided by the labor force that is coming from the graphical model. And then we have the wage curve. So the wage depends on the wage of the previous year, the labor productivity, the distance between employment and the equilibrium unemployment rate, and the consumption price index. What does this mean? Well, basically, if you increase the labor productivity, you increase the wages. This is a positive number. Here, what you have is that the unemployment rate is low and it is very close to the equilibrium unemployment rate, wages increases. Otherwise, they do not increase. Okay? And then they
Where does the equilibrium unemployment rate come from?
I think that, I don't remember. It's something that I don't buy. I can check it later. AMEC? I don't remember. And then we have the consumer price index. You have inflation, you have also sometimes a pickup in the wage. And these parameters are sectoral specific. For instance, we have estimated those, not regional specific, but are sectoral specific. And the thing is that an I is missing here. If you have an increase in the consumer price index, some sectors will increase the wages, for instance, typical of the administration, government. In some industrial sectors, the wages are linked to the prices, but in other not. For instance, in the agricultural program, normally the prices are not too much linked to the wages, are not too much linked to the consumer price index. This is something that is calculated for each of the sectors. And then you multiply the wage per hour by the hours worked, we have the labor compensation that is part of the unity. More or less clear? Again, if you want to see how we have computed these parameters, etc., basically the wage equation, you have all the documentation in the website. So this is how it works. So we start from the production module, from the input module, we have the output. From the output, taking into account the labor productivity, we have the hours. And on the other hand, we have the wages, the wage per hour that depends from the labor, on the labor productivity. And on the, here there is a link, the consumer price index of the previous year. This is lagging variables. The wage per hour of the previous year, and then the unemployment rate of the previous year. So with this, you compute the wage per hour, and wage per hour times hour is labor compensation, and with the labor compensation, it goes to the household consumption. And from the hours divided by the hours per worker, you have the employment, and with the employment and the active population, you have the unemployment rate. And this unemployment rate lagged goes here, and in this wage per hour will affect the prices of its industry. And this affects the import shares, and also will affect the consumer price indices that feedbacks here in the next period. And basically that's it. So this is the labor module. Then we have the investment and capital stock. For the investment, what we have is a capital adjustment mechanism towards the desired expert capacity. This is for non-energy and non-transport sectors, because for the investment of those sectors is calculated bottom up in the energy module. And these are the equations. It's pretty simple compared to the others. So you have the output of the previous year and the output growth in the previous year as well. And this is the output expected in 1 year for each of the sectors and each of the regions. We create some expectations on the output that you are going to, you have to supply in 1 year based on the past. Okay? And depending on this output, so this is the output that you expect to produce, and then you multiply by 1 plus the spare capacity. The spare capacity is depending on the stock of capital that you have, you can produce a fixed amount of products. But sometimes you want to have some spare capacity in order, just in case you have some unexpected demand, you want to have some spare capacity to supply that demand. Okay? So this is something that it is exogenous. And in dividing by the capital productivity, you have the desired capital that you want to have. So the difference between the capital that it is desired and the capital of the previous year is the investment that you need to have this capital desired. The problem is that normally you cannot invest all what you want, so you have an adjustment speed. So this is buffered by a coefficient that is lower than 1. And then if you have the typical capital stock equations, so the capital stock in 1 year is the capital of the previous year plus the investment minus the consumption of fixed capital of the previous year. And this is important. The consumption of fixed capital is the depreciation, that it is very standard in economic model, plus the damages of climate change. Now we have assumed that climate change can damage the stock of capital, and that can have an impact in the production processes. And this is something that will be later explained by Paula. And remember this, consumption of fixed capital includes climate change, and this is important because normally when you compute the gross domestic product, the gross domestic product takes into account the consumption of fixed capital. So it's the labor compensation, the net operating surplus, the benefits, plus the consumption of fixed capital. It is gross. But the net domestic product do not take this into account. So if you are consuming capital or you are destroying capital, this is something that it is negative. Okay? And this is something that we are computing. On top of reporting the gross domestic product, we are reporting the net domestic product. So it's the net domestic product captures the impacts of climate change in the capital structure. Normally, when you see losses or impacts in the GDP, this is not included. Because it's included because they are reporting the gross domestic product as something positive. I mean, they are computing the consumption of fixed capital as something positive in the gross, but in the net, this is not here. You will see it later, yes?
This is essentially Harold's approach, right? So it would have explosive dynamics, or do you balance these because output growth is exogenous?
Well, output growth is not exogenous. Here you have an expectation. But in the next year, if you are destroying capital and you cannot produce, increasing the prices, etc., it's going to change your expectation.
Yeah, but then you have an explosive dynamic, right? Feedback loop both, because investment is part of the output growth in the next period. So what in the
yes and no. But in this, yes, of course, this is something that you have. But if you increase the consumption of fixed capital, you are increasing also the price. And if you increase the price, you are killing demand.
Yeah.
So you're right, there are two dynamics. So you can invest more. If you invest more, I mean, if you invest to replace the capital stock, it's going to create activity, blah, 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 and it's going to create more GDP, etc., etc. But you have a mechanism that, well, since you are consuming more capital, you have more costs. And this is going to increase the prices, and prices are going to kill demand.
Yes. I don't believe that exists in reality, but that's okay. Yeah, like it makes sense in the model. Yeah.
But you also have other components of demand because in Harold he only has consumption and investment, everything depending on the income. So this is part of this problem. He doesn't have other sources of demand that balance this effect. And also the adjustment speed is important because Harold assumes.
Well, this is something that yesterday we were discussing with Paula. One number you put here, that it depends on many things. Now it's fixed, but it could depend on many things. Well, this is the structure again. So we start here. We have the output of the previous year and the output growth. This is the output expected, depending on the capital productivity that you. So you have the capital stock design, and you have with the capital stock of the previous year, the capital stock design and the adjustment speed. You have the investment. And this is for non-energy sector because remember, investment for energy and transportation from bottom-up models. So this investment goes directly to the final demand. You have to produce that investment. And it's part of together with the capital stock of the previous year, the consumption of this capital is the capital stock. And then for the consumption of this capital, you have the depreciation rate and the damages that depend on the temperature. Then we calculate the operating surplus. That is the difference between the gross operating. Yes, this is the net operating surplus that is calculated by double deflation. Is the output minus intermediate demand minus labor compensation minus taxes minus consumption of fixed capital. By definition, is like this. Okay, and that net operating surplus goes to households. How is the link with energy and the materials models? Well, we have a two-way link, one from the economy to the materials and energy, and the other one from energy and materials to the economic model. From the economy, basically what we have is that the demand is calculated by multiplying the output by an intensity. That can be a final energy intensity or a material intensity. For instance, copper per unit or per million euros or million US dollars of activity on the copper mining sector. Okay? And you translate from million US dollars with this intensity to tons. Okay, and then we have the same for final energy. How much energy you need of each of the final energy that we have to produce 1 unit of within each sector. And with this, we compute the demand of materials and energy. And then we have a link from materials to economy. And this link is, first we have the price of energy, of oil, coal, and gas, and non-energy materials, which feedbacks into the economy. And then we have all the information from the energy sector. We have the output of the different energy sectors and also the transformation inputs. And this goes directly to the technical coefficient matrix. Okay, so this is the feedback, and we have also the feedback with the one direction feedback between the energy and economy in relation to the investment. Investment in the energy sector goes directly from energy to money to the economy. So this is what we have. And this is how it works. So we have the production module. From the production, we have the output. With the output, with the final energy intensity, we have the final energy demand. With the final energy demand, in the energy module, they calculate the demand for energy materials, coal, gas, and oil. And this goes from here, the demand, and this goes to the materials module, and calculate the price of these materials, for oil, gas, and coal. And this is for energy materials. And for non-energy materials, for copper, aluminum, etc., we have the output of the mining industries, etc., and multiplied by the materials intensities. We have the demand of non-energy materials, copper, etc., and we have a price. And this price feedbacks goes again to the economic model. This is the price feedback, this one, the A, 2A. And then we have the other feedback, that it is all the information on the activity of the energy industries go back to the economic model. This is how it works.
Where do you take the final energy intensity from? The final energy intensity, how you calculate it?
Basic for the first year, what we have is that we have the output of the different industries, and we have the final energy use by fuel from the satellite energy accounts that we have completed. That are following the same methodology as XIOs.
This is for the first year, and what happens to the...
In the energy module, they have it's calculating how it works, it's calculated in the energy module.
The dynamic of the energy density depends mainly of, I mentioned yesterday something about that, but there is something, let's say, inertial trend, so it's for historical data, so I'm trying to adjust. And so you can modify, we can modify this trend according at least two main variables. One is the changing in the technology. So I mean, if you are using fuel, an industrial process, and you want to change from fuel to electricity, it is possible to do it. So you can change from one intensity to another. And in the case of this change of technology, you should take into account the efficiency of each technology. Maybe electric technology is efficient, more efficient, or maybe less efficient. So we have to take into account. This is one of the, let's say, drivers of the changing. And the other drive is that, let's say, what I mentioned yesterday about the research, how effort you do in research. You can increase the previous historical research on this intensity and efficiency, so you can, let's say, improve a little bit more than historic values, but just a little bit more. You cannot decide that now we are going to just shift to a much better, or maybe you don't improve because you don't have like before the research, so you maintain more or less the same trend, even less. This is the dynamic. There is a paper telling that if you want to try to explain what I have been doing.
And when you said that we are going to prove the energy efficiency by around 2030 or so, did you do that also into the model?
Well, these are parameters. These parameters for the trend of the energy intensity. We fix some, let's say, nominal values we consider, and over these business as usual values, we can change according policies, scenarios. So usually between a certain margin. So you can decide that we are growing quicker or low.
And are you using energy densities by sector?
Yeah.
and content.
Yeah, well, there are two exceptions also in Elasticities. The bottom-up for transport. For transport, we have a bottom-up approach. So the elasticity is estimated through all the transport modes we already have, all the different devices we use for transport. So in the transport case, this is a bottom-up approach to obtain the elasticity. And maybe we are trying, I'm not sure if we will get the time on time for building sector also. So in this case, it's a bottom-up. So for the rest of the cases, just a top-down approach.
Okay. So the price equation, we have a price. But this is for non-energy, non-materials products, because from materials, the prices are coming from the bottom-up model. So we have a function that depends on which the prices depend on a markup over cost, and the costs are the capital cost, the labor cost, the cost of domestic intermediates, the cost of imported intermediates, and all the taxes on production and intermediate uses. And if you have a tax on CO2, that would be also here. Okay, so this is a equation. You have the price of no materials in regular part, no material sectors. It's a markup over all the costs, and in the cost you have the price, the cost of capital. That includes the damage cost, that is what we were discussing before. You have also the cost of labor, the cost of domestic intermediates, the cost of foreign intermediates, and the taxes. And that's it. Yeah.
Is the markup also sector specific?
Yes. Yeah. And this is data. We have the markup is something that is already in the data. We have is the operating surplus divided by all the costs, and it's fixed. We keep it fixed. For some sector, we have changed that, because some specific sector you can, in the first year you have a negative markup, and that's not funny. So then we do an adjustment. And also in some sector you can have huge markups, and we have to that. It could be, for instance, those markups due to the, especially in some sectors that we have a split. So you remember that we depart from a mining sector and we split, and we can have strange numbers, and we have to fix them, filter them. And normally they come from the data. I think that maybe I think that we will stop here, and then since this is something that is quite tricky, I think that it's better we start after the coffee break. Okay. Yeah. Sí, a ver, aquí lo que el problema de muchas veces al final esto Aumenta muy bien. Esto sí es un poco de es que la teoría, la mayoría de esto se tendría que dar porque si no, claro, es el problema de todas las
我问问题，我会不会
回答别人吗？
这个数据在欧洲比较详细一点，然后 Excel base 的话，数据没有那么清晰。但是它不准还是合并的。
más tarde.
两种价格，一种是能源材料价格，一种是非能源材料价格。能源材料价格，能源某块价格。
他没讲价格。
他说是在那材料某块。根据那个，但是不光是根据。然后来，它不是价格然后你看它不是能源价格，是消费者不一样。没有。他说的是每个区域不一样。
Por eso tiene que ser. Claro, es que el problema es que estas políticas tienen que tener sentido. Aquí, por ejemplo, aquí está la ley de actividades constante.
是你讲的是基于那个，但你看它的价格还是很长。是基于那个价格，有很多。
De hecho, eso, a ver, antes de plantear esa política, habrá que ver qué tenemos en el foro servicio. Con esta gran ley tenemos un paso en España del 30%. Tenemos, pero la progresión porque no tiene sentido. Bueno, tiene sentido si lo que quieres es crear inflación y matar a la. Si quieres hacer eso, si tu política está destinada a matar a la demanda, hazlo. Pero normalmente esto se trata, estas políticas son sobre todo para distribuir el empleo, para mantener ese empleo, en el caso de España, más países. Sí, estás en un caso que la ley no puede decir que aumenta la hostia, puede ser una superficie de trabajo, o sí que no hacer este de casa, pero si no. Y ojo, aquí no sé cómo lo tengo que claro, pero igual algún país tiene tasas de desempleo. Porque es que eso tenemos que entender.
Yo creo que es un poco porque también estamos muy interesados, por ejemplo, en generar el blog, sobre eso de normalizarlo. Y una de las chicas, la que participó en Valladolid, que proponía ideas de los blogs, y que bueno, es que muchas las echáis atrás. Y yo creo que un poco va en que necesitas como una estabilidad del sistema y a partir de ahí ir metiendo como pequeñas políticas que incluso en algunos países puede no tengan sentido. Entonces es que es tan asimétrico también y en tantos tipos que va a haber que tener cuidado a ver dónde tocas.
Bueno, de hecho, esta política está en un escenario en el que tienes degrowth ya, per se, molaría mogollón. Cuando ya tienes degrowth, estás en una estagnación o lo que sea, y hostia, tengo mogollón de pequeño claro, hago eso, en ese caso. Y otra cosa, ¿sabes qué pasa también? Que ahora el feedback de los precios no está con la demanda. Es que en ese escenario,
Es lo que quería ver yo, ¿cómo construyo esto
¿sabes qué
sabiendo
pasa?
lo que falta?
Que en el escenario ese aumento de los salarios te generaría como aumento de precio y matarías demanda.
Aquí lo que se está haciendo es solo que si
Claro.
los salarios son equivalentes y sube
Lo que han ido enseñando también ha sido como cosas.
Oído.
O sea, lo que quería ver es por qué se daba ese pico. Y no entendía. Y digo,
I guess very good.
No, to sam wierzę, że to jest teoretyczna socjalizacja dosyć.
Да, Виктор, домисло, ali nije mi govorio.
Mi se bilo ponovno od 118. A
Čemu?
aha, to su strane. Evo sam,
A ja sam isto mislio sve što sam, ne znam dužo prikladno. Slučaju da počekam.
I have a good idea where we can go with it. Like, there's some nice spots between this small little bay between the castle and
Going wrong too.
No, I practiced later when we were in restaurant. Oh, I needed very much training. Like, I'm not that good.
Studije Dutki, Duško, jedan je Stančić u Australiji, tamo je Josip Ana, možda je ono mjesto od Stančića.
Sí, pero que y de Madrid a Valladolid. O sea, yo de Madrid. Se llega a las 8 de la noche, ¿no? Claro, es que es eso. Y yo me quedo a ver, eso mucho.
God, now I
Okay, let's continue. Well, as I already mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this household consumption model is a key part of the economic model of million. In this case, and different other integrated assessment models, we have developed a heterogeneous approach. That means that instead of having a representative median for most of the regions, we have multiple households that consume and react differently depending on their economic situation and preferences. And for the EU, we have 60 household types that depend on whether the households are rural or urban, the household composition, that we have 6 different types of households, retired people, people with children, this type of characteristics, and 5 income levels. So we have 2 times 6 times 5, 60 household types. But in other regions, due to data constraints, we have just 1 representative household. It's a limitation of the model. In the future, we would like to develop that part, especially in other countries, like for instance in China, we have countries like India, Russia, United States, Mexico, that we know that data is taken out, but we haven't accessed that data. This is very important because it allows us to capture the distributional impacts of different climate change scenarios and policies. In order to develop this heterogeneous model, we have created a new integrated micro data set. And what Manuel has been doing is using statistical matching techniques is to merge the household budget survey that covers for the European Union the data at the household level for expenditure in different categories of commodities of expenditure. We have data from EU SILC for income and the household financial and consumption survey from the European Central Bank for wealth. So we have for each of the household, we have information on expenditure in different commodities. Not at the 60 household level, but at the household level of I think that we had almost 200,000 households. 200,000 households are representative of the member states of the European Union. We have information of the expenditure by category, on the wealth by source of wealth, by type of wealth, and the income by source. The data getting income from labor, from assets, how the taxes that they are paying, etc. And we have this database for the year 2010 and 2015, with the national account. It's a key output of the model that enabled us to compute to do the econometric estimation for the household submodule. With this database, we have calculated different marginal propensities to consume, income and price elasticities for different products and households, and but for those of you that are not familiar with these terms, marginal propensities to consume, say, depending on the income and wealth that you have, how much do you spend? Okay, yes?
There's no separation by gender.
We have, for some of the data, at least for the monoparental households.
Yes, singles with and without children, couples with and without children, so 4 groups, and then we have other type of households with and without children. So based on this type of household, we have 6 categories, but then we combine also with other characteristics such as rural, urban, or income levels.
But we don't know exactly. The problem with this is that we have at the beginning of the project, the idea was to work with the 200,000 households, and for each household you have the composition of that household. But the problem is that, this is for computational purposes that it was not feasible, so we decided to reduce the number of households, and once you aggregate, you lose that dimension, the gender dimension. In the future, we would like to test to what extent increasing the household number to increase all the characteristics like the gender would be feasible in principle. But this is something that we haven't tested, and let's see if we have time. Because it would be very interesting to for instance, split these 6 types of households depending on gender. You could do something, at least for instance for the singles, you could have male or female, and also for the people living along with monoparental families, whether the head is a man of male, and also for retired people would be also interesting.
The thing here is that you are working with households. So the definition of a household, you have different situations. In which maybe you have just one female, but you can have couple, you have other type of family, so it is not easy to isolate the gender effect when you analyze the consumption of a household, which have different members. That's the point, but we need household with it. What we have in the model.
Indeed, in other projects, we are working with 200,000 households, and we report more simplified models, not integrated models, other type of models, and we report the results for gender as well. But not in this case. So with this information, we estimate the parameters, the marginal propensity to consume that I mentioned, the income price elasticity, how different the demand of different commodities react to the increase in the or changes in the income or the price of the commodity. And the model is a mix between bottom up and top down in the sense that most of the part of the equations are part of the consumption is estimated completely in the economic model, and part comes from bottom up models, I would say, especially transportation and energy usability. Yes.
And after for the elasticity, it's only for the large.
Yes.
Okay, only.
Are calculated with this, and then we have take these elasticities, and we have depend on the basis of the GDP per capita.
Yeah.
We have
per capita we are started.
Yes. Yes, to other. We have donors and recipients. Yes, of elasticities. So. And also there is something that is still important that we would like to introduce a behavioral change as well, and have like a kind of green and grow and brown or more carbon friendly households ideas, but that will increase the number of households, but we think that it will be interesting. The idea is that for a household that has, for two households that has exactly the same income level, they are rural or urban and has exactly the same composition, some of them behaves in one way, more green, and the others in more carbon intensive style of life. And the idea will be to play with the weights of the different households in order to see to what extent this increasing in environmental concern can contribute to reduce the footprint of the households. But this is something that we are still working on that. And the model is already connected, the consumption model is connected with other parts of the model. Yes?
Yeah, I want to know if you can elaborate a little on how is the mixed top-down demand on transportation and energy working?
I will later go into detail. And the model is, as already mentioned, is connected to other parts of the other modules like the bar model, of course, and the changing the number of households. The buildings and residential energy model, the transportation model, and the financial model. The first part of the consumption household model is the income and wealth. Basically, what we have is that each of the households that we have, these 60 type of households that we have in the consumption module, they receive a primary income from different sources, with the distribute the income for each of the households, and they decide whether they are going to consume outside the income. So we have, for each of the households, we have the disposable income. R is the region, H is the 1 to 60 household type, and T is time. And this is the equation for the household income. So we have, this is all the household, the income that is receiving each household, each group of households, and we divide by the number of households that are in each group. So we have the income of the representative household, one representative household. So, and they receive income from labor. So we take the labor compensation that we have in the production module, take out the social security contributions. This is what equals to households, and we share that between the different households. This is something that this is a first version of the model. The idea is that we want also to model these shares. And the same we have for the operating surplus, for the profits. So we have the gross operating surplus minus the taxes, and we sell to the different households. Households have also assets, and these assets have a yield that generates an income for the households. And then, but also households also pay taxes on income and wealth. That is out from the disposable income. But they also receive from the government social benefits. And they have also other transfer. And this is the disposable income.
Just briefly, what are these assets and why are the yields not part of operating surpluses?
I mean, this is the profits that they are receiving directly from the companies, own companies, and this is an asset, that financial asset that they have a yield that is different. So you have this differentiation also in the national accounts.
Yes, yeah, sure, but you have finance as a sector in the IO table, so don't double count them.
No.
But earlier there was finance in the list.
Yes, but it's this one.
No, but this is the income that they are receiving in the households.
Yes.
One is the household and the other is the sector.
It will determine the consumption, and then we use this consumption vector in the EO framework. So this is just something that we take into account in the consumption module. Then in the input output framework, we will have this type of financial statements. Okay, and risk is not here.
Yes. I don't understand what we can use.
No, finance is an economic sector. It's one of the economic sector like any other sector, like cars or whatever. But here, the assets for households comes from the financial model. That means that all financial assets are more or less modeled, and some part of them comes to profit for households. This is the one that we receive here. It's nothing to do with the financial sector like another private economic sector.
Okay.
So here they are out of the input-output framework.
Yeah, that I understand, but I need to know that there's two finance sectors, one is the input-output, and then there's the financial module, no?
Well, that's right, but one is, let's say,
but the financial model is much more than that.
And the financial is another model with much more things.
Okay.
So this is the disposable income. There are parts here that comes from the financial module, like the assets and the yield, and also this part, the disposable income, and also you have for each household, you have the net worth. That is the sum of the housing stock, financial assets, minus loss. This also comes from the financial model. So this is how it looks like. It looks, so you have the total labor compensation, part goes to the government, the social security contribution. You have also the net operating surplus, the net property income, transfers for employment pensions and other transfers. This is the gross income. And then you have taxes on income and wealth, and from gross income minus taxes, you have the disposable income. And the taxes on income and wealth, well, it depends on the wealth and the tax rates as well. So you have collecting from the income and from the wealth. And this is already in the financial model. This is not the production model anymore. So you have here from the financial model, you have the wealth that is coming from financial assets, liabilities, and liabilities. Okay. So this is basically the structure of the consumption model of William. So first, the model, each household decide how much they are going to consume, of durables and non-durables, depending on the income and wealth for each specific type of household. For the durables, they decide whether they are spending in households, in household, vehicles, and appliances. Housing is linked to the financial model. Vehicles is linked to the energy model, transportation model, and appliances. And for non-durables, you have non-durables energy and non-durables non-energy. the energy is linked to the bottom-up energy models for the electricity, heating fuel, private transportation, and fuel, and public transportation. And then you have the demand for non-energy categories. And you have leisure, food, textiles, services, furniture, and other certain categories that we have. So, well, for the durables, we are here on the top of this tree. We have three types of durables: housing services that include actual and imputed rents, and maintenances, appliances, and vehicles. So this is the total consumption of durables. We have housing, appliances, and vehicles. We have an equation for each of these. And for each of them, we have that the consumption of housing services depends on the disposable income and also on the wealth of the household. And the same we have for appliances and for the consumption of vehicles. In this case, this comes bottom up. This is not true anymore. This now comes from the bottom up model. Okay? So for the non-durables, so once we have the durables, we have the consumption of durables that also depends on the income and the wealth. These are parameters that have been estimated on the basis of the joint micro database that we have developed. And then we have two types of energy-related non-durables. So in the non-durables, we have the energy-related and the non-energy related. In the energy-related, we have those related to transportation, that are basically the fuel for driving your car, or electricity for driving your car, and the part of public transportation. You buy a ticket of a bus or a flight or whatever. And in the non-energy, we have the categories, the seven categories that are here, 6 categories that are here. Food, stylish, so we have energy-related non-durables and non-energy-related non-durables. So we are going to explain now how this is calculated and how this is calculated. For the energy-related part, we have, as I already mentioned, the ones that are related to the transportations, and I didn't mention them, and the ones that are related to the energy building. I think that I missed that. I already mentioned. So we have transportation and energy buildings. And in transportation, we have the private transportation and public transportation. So for the transportation, first, what we compute is the total passenger kilometers, okay, in the economic model.
This is relevant, the 6 non-durable, non-energy related.
Mm-hmm.
The 6 one you almost mentioned for the previous one. You said that there are 6 non-durables.
Yeah. Yes.
Textile, leisure, furniture, but more service.
They are here.
Because it's not easy to see.
You have food and zinc consumption, tobacco, alcohol, and those things. Leisure and holidays, textiles, basic services, health, education, these things, financial services, furniture and equipment, and other. These are the 6 categories that we have.
Sorry, can I come back to that slide? So what is included in other goods and not non-services, only goods?
No, normally they are services, no? I think in the other.
Because you have basic services, so I want to know.
I think maybe if you want
but then you have financial services that are part of the other.
Basically, what we have in the, more or less, in the, this is linked to the COICOP classification of consumption by category, and at the 2-digit level you have 12 categories, more or less. And this is an hybrid between the 12 categories here plus a disaggregation of the energy of 4.7 for the group 4.
Yeah,
and
4 and 7.
Yes.
45 and 7.
So this is linked, in any case, what in the later view one we can see because I have opened the deliverable already described that. So this is an aggregation. Indeed, this is something that we can change if we want. For instance, in Fidel, I think that we have 9 here, or more. 8 items. So we can play with that if we want.
In the case of the appliance from the durable, the consumption of appliance is determined by the disposable income. So there's in a redistributive scenario that in a really unequal country that you a lot of people out of poverty. That they will increase the disposable income, they will increase the consumption of appliance.
Yes.
And so in that way of modeling, there is no way to have a scenario that you can have a redistributive scenario without a radical increase of the consumption of appliance.
You're completely right, unless you put, for instance, a tax on appliances, for example, or vehicles, for instance. This is something that we have been discussing a lot, and indeed when we are designing the post-growth scenario, it's something that is the same, for instance, with something that Paolo will introduce later, that is the reduction of working time. Because with that, you are going to distribute more the labor income, and you are going to trigger consumption, because basically the income elastic, the propensity, marginal propensity to consume are higher in lower times than in higher parts. And also you have different elasticities, income elasticity for different products. So if you increase the income of lower quantities, they are going to probably drive more and consume more energy, but not in the much more than the rich people does. You give to the rich guy $1 more, probably they are going to drive $1 kilometer more. This is something that we can capture because we have this split of different households. We would like to have more households, but especially in terms of income levels, because it changes a lot, depending on whether you have 1, 5, or 10. But let's see in the future if we can do that. And also, it's also very important to calculate rebound effects as well. So we were here. So remember we are in non-durables, energy-related, transportation. So here first what we do is to compute the total passenger kilometers. That depends on the price of transportation and the total consumption of non-durables. And once we have calculated these passenger kilometers, we send this, before. We have this total passenger kilometers, and the price of transportation, that is a price index, depends on the transportation modes that you are using. So if, it depends on whether you are using more fuels and you are not using public transportation, but you have an increase in the price of fuels, you are going to be affected. But if you have an increase in the price of public transportation and you only use your car, you are not going to be affected. So depending on your transportation mix, you have for each household type, you have a different price. And this price depends on this transport share of this transportation mix that comes from the bottom-up model that I will explain later. So far we are calculating how many passenger kilometers are you at each household doing, and the price that they are facing. Now we have to see how these total passenger kilometers translate into expenditure, because in the economic model, in the consumption model, we need the expenditure that each household is doing in fuels for driving and in public transportation. So we start here, and then what we do with these passenger kilometers, we send them to the transportation module, and in the transportation module, they do the model split, and they decide for each household how many kilometers they are doing in each transportation mode. And in the case of the use of private transportation, car or motorcycle or whatever, the fuel that they are using. Fuel can be gasoline, diesel, electricity, hydrogen, or whatever. And what we do is, once this consumption in physical units has been calculated, we translate using prices into monetary expenditure. And this is what we put into the input-output model. The consumption of electricity, etc., in monetary terms. And in the case of private transportation, public transportation, we do something similar. We have for each modal transportation mode, for instance, the use of road transportation, high transportation, whatever, we have a price that transforms passenger kilometers into US dollars, and this is what it enters into that model. So the idea is, first we compute the total passenger kilometers, we translate in the energy model total passenger kilometers into passenger kilometers of public transportation by mode, and into energy directly consumed by households, and we translate those variables into monetary units, and we plug that into the economic model.
So I see that you have a variable that shows the level of service, which is the passenger kilometers, and that I can infer that you keep track of the number of vehicles and how they are like procedures.
In the equation that I have shown before,
Yeah.
vehicles are dependent on, this is a old specification in which the vehicles depend on the income and on the wealth. But that's not true anymore, and now this is calculated bottom up, and when they calculate bottom up, they take into account economic wealth and whatever, but we take also that bottom up. So it is fully consistent with the passenger kilometers here now. Because at the very beginning, we computed the stock of vehicles in the consumption module, but it could be the case that it is not consistent with the modal split that it is calculated here. But now, since everything comes from the bottom up, it is fully consistent.
Yeah, well,
Was that your question? No.
My question was more simple, like you keep track of the number of vehicles.
Yes, sure, in the bottom up model, yes. Indeed, we have also, both in physical and in monetary units, the stock of vehicles.
And is there, I guess that there's a parameter translating these passenger kilometers to vehicle kilometers. Is that dependent on?
That is part of the transportation model. Yeah. Well, they have these occupancy rates, and they translate passenger kilometers into vehicles kilometers, taking account the efficiency into energy use, and energy use is then transformed into monetary units. That's more or less how it works. So this is the link. And then for the energy consumed individuals, this is something that it is already is still in progress. And the idea is that we are going to do something that is a kind of top-down and bottom-up approach as well. First, in the economic model, depending on the wealth and income of the households, they decide the level of comfort that they can afford. And it's a variable that goes between 0 and 1. Okay? Imagine a household that is very rich, a lot of income, a lot of wealth. They don't care about the lights, they don't want the heating, etc. So the comfort is 1. And for other households with less income, more other conditions, this would be 0.5. So for each of the 60 households types, we have estimation of this comfort that depends on the income, well, not on the consumption of non-durables, that depends on the income and wealth, and the price of the energy. So you have an increase in the price, probably the rich people, they are not going to grab, but poor people, probably they are going to grab, and they are going to reduce the comfort. Okay, so we have that. And on the other hand, in the building model that it is in the energy module, they calculate the energy required in physical terms and by type of energy to get the maximum level of comfort. So they don't take care about whether it's a rich people or whatever. They take into account the characteristic of the building, whether this is a rural or urban, whether it's the area of the building, etc., the level of isolation, the level of efficiency. It's a bottom-up model of the consumption of energy in buildings. They calculate how much energy would you require to achieve the maximum level of comfort. Okay. Then what we do is combine the two things. So this is the maximum that you should demand to have the highest level of comfort, but some people can afford that, so they have a one of comfort, and other people cannot. So we multiply the maximum energy required times the comfort factor, and we have this the actual energy that is demanded in physical unit by type of energy. So the gas that is demanded in a household with that specific characteristics, the electricity or whatever. And then this is translated into demand in monetary units. It is what we put into the model, the economic model. So this is what we have. So the consumption of energy in buildings is the physical energy consumption in buildings that comes here, times the price of the energy. Okay, so far what we have is the consumption on durables, the three types of durables, this part. We have for the non-durables energy related, we have the part of transportation and the part of the energy buildings, and what it is missing is the non-durables, non-energy related. And what we have is that the total consumption of non-durable, non-energy is the consumption of non-durables that you decided here, minus the energy. So we have already computed this consumption of non-durable, non-durable energy, that it is transportation plus energy in buildings. So the consumption of non-durable energy is non-durable minus what you have already consumed. This is what we have here. The non-durable energy is the energy for private transportation. So this is not okay. So it's energy for private transportation, public transportation, plus energy in buildings. So this should be here. Okay? F is the fuel that you are using. T is the time. H is the type of household, and R is the region. So this would be electricity used for transportation in Spain in the household type 1. Okay? This is public consumption of public transportation. Here, M is the mode. What it is air transportation, public transport, road transportation, whatever. And energy buildings with this F is exactly the same. It's electricity that for. Yes.
For the direct household energy, like for cooling and heating, is that also included in building?
Yes, yes. Lighting, heating, and cooling.
Yeah, the direct and indirectly, all in the building.
Sorry?
All in the building sector, like the direct maybe just from the coal, just heat by coal, and maybe using electricity.
This shift is calculated in the bottom-up model. Okay. So, for instance, refurbishment of dwellings, better insulation, changes from one boiler to other boiler, etc. This is something that is calculated in the bottom-up model.
Yeah, so all direct and indirect parts also included in the building consumption.
What do you mean with indirect part?
The definition of non-direct.
Do you mean emissions or
direct? Like the enemy services? It's not included. Maybe.
No worry.
Yeah, okay. Maybe later.
Okay. So this is what we have. Now the next step is to split this. So remember that we have calculated now the part that it is missing, the total consumption of non-durable, non-energy. And the next step is to split this into the 6 categories. And in order to do that, what we do is we use a quadratic model, a quadratic almost ideal demand system that we have estimated, Manuel has estimated that. And simply what it does is computes the share of the total consumption of non-durables, non-energy that you are going to spend in food or in textiles or whatever. And this is the equation for the calculation of these shares. And the shares depends on the price cross and on price elasticities that we have for the 6 commodities. and it depends on the total consumption of non-durables and the prices for the commodities. Okay, so imagine that you have for an increase in the price of food. This means that probably you are going to increase the part of the expenditure in monetary units that you are going to spend in food, and you are going to reduce other things. Some households, others could be the case that no. Okay. Well, in the share you are going to reduce, but in physical, in monetary terms, all the shares are going to change, but not in real terms. But basically, this is what we capture here: the substitution between the shares when you have changes in the total consumption or in the prices.
This prices comes from the production model.
Yes.
But you have to aggregate several sectors and.
Yeah, this is a bit complicated because basically for each household we have a price index. And the price index depends on the shares of these categories in the total: food, textiles, etc. And the price of textiles, etc., furniture depends on the composition of this category, the composition of products coming from the input-output model. For instance, in services, you remember that you have a category that is services. In services, we have education, we have health, we have other services, etc. And if you have an increase in the price of health, that is going to affect the price of category services here. So you have we have some matrices that link each category here, 6 categories, to the different sectors that are producing that category.
I know that's maybe it's not that, but it's a little bit probably because in order to drive behavioral change in consumption behavior, these equations are not very friendly to change the parameter. You cannot say it's not very easy to decide which parameter to change if you want to change the pattern of consumption of a certain household.
Our idea is that
this logarithm like
for this, the idea is the green and brown thing. The idea is that we have this for each type of household, for the 60. But so far, we don't have gray or brown. We have, households. The idea to split green and gray households, depending on, if in the base year we have that a household has a lower footprint, exactly the same household, a lower footprint for these products than another one, we can see that this is green and the other is not green. And the idea is to play with the weights. It's something that it is exogenous, and the idea is to play with the weights. In any case, most of the emissions are not here, of the footprint. Most of the footprint of the household is going to be transportation, energy, and buildings, probably 50% of the footprint. So or more.
But it's part of this consumption pattern. How much is you use for transport?
Well, but indeed, what I was mentioning that you can play with the green and gray in each part of here. In terms of footprint, energy or emissions footprint, most is going to be in the durables, vehicles, appliances, and those things that you can, in those parts of the model, you can see. You can play with the green and brown approach, also in the energy use buildings, and probably I don't care too much about the footprint of health compared to the other footprint of all the other categories, or the footprint of furniture. Probably food is another thing, but food is already well captured in the bottom model. But in any case, the thing of going towards the green and brown thing of classification, I think that would be interesting. If we want to do something related to behavioral change, that is going to do something that is going to be like part of this storyline, because you don't have a policy that it is going to increase the number of green household by 50%. You can, well, this is important, this type of approach, if you want to explore what happens if 50% of the households that were brown are now in the green part. Because they have changed their mind, because they are education.
So behavior change
if we, so far we haven't implemented that would be something exogenous. But behavioral change, towards green and brown, because you have a lot of behavioral change here, but it is driven by prices and income. So far. And in the case of energy buildings and transportation, from the bottom up. Maybe in the bottom up model of transportation, you can have something related to behavioral change, especially in the model split, but not here.
In those policies, usually there are also proposals of policies that affect behavioral change, with education or education. So these kind of things, it's not
no. This is what I was referring, splitting this into green and brown.
Yeah.
This one.
What you do is to increase the weight of the green household.
Yeah.
Taking into account the
have
effect of this policy that you mentioned.
The thing is that for each of this is at the household level. For each type of household, we have the number of households that are in that category. That it is coming from the demographic model. Okay? But so far we have these 60 types of households. But it could be the case that instead of having 60, have 120, but having green and brown like a new category of households and playing with their weights, the number of households that are in the green and brown. That would be the idea. And you start from the because for the base year we can calculate the footprint of each of the green and the brown. That's quite straightforward. And what you have in the base year, you can see that for this type of household, 10% can be characterized as green and 90% as brown. What would happen if in 2050 everyone is green? What is the potential, or 50 or whatever, because of education or whatever? It's something that could be done. No, it's not implemented. I think that it wouldn't be problematic from the data part, but it could be problematic because for computational purposes.
I compute like modeling endogenously the behavioral changes like really hard and really relevant. So most of the approach are exogenous, but I find it a little problematic, like this approach of the green and gray behavior, in the sense of like it's like a household decision of behavior in that way. For example, in this part of the consumption, consuming less furniture and more services, that's like a decision, and that's probably that needs to be driven somehow, for example, for public expenditure in more health. But is that computed in the model somehow or not? Because if it's a household decision, which is the one that drives that change in consumption, maybe you can have a what-if scenario and you check the consequences, but you need something previous that you are not doing.
Yeah. Now it would be something that comes from ML.
Okay.
Because this would be probably another project by itself.
Yeah. But we can assume that some policies will have an effect on this, the weight of the green household. This kind of undertreatment policies or education and so on. So we can create a next scenario, a realistic scenario.
I think David, a colleague who is working in the part of transport module, is trying to do something in the demos regarding behavior change, because there's a part is exogenous, for example, depending on the economic scenarios, but as you say, other parties endogenous, depending on public expenditure or even temperature. I think he's trying to do something with temperature. For example, if people see that temperature is going too high, they are afraid of and try to shift their transport mode. And I think something about that is going to be done.
In the transport, it's possible to change the different behavior modes, voluntary behavior mode, because we have too many drivers. One is the voluntary decision you want. In transport is possible, yeah, more or less. And the other is the market price. So if the price is quite high, you decide, okay, I'm not going to buy because it's too expensive. So, but you are right that the options we already have now are limited by this green, brown or gray household, and in some cases like transport, and there are some options for this, say, voluntary changes.
Okay. Well, this is what I have explained, but in a flow chart. I think that I'm not going to do too much in this because we have the other session, but basically it is more or less, you have the disposable income, you have the well, depending on this marginal capacity to consume, you decide how much you are going to spend on durables and durables. Disposable income, well, and this gives the total consumption. Disposable income minus household consumption is the savings, and that goes to the financial model. Then we have the split of the non-durables. Remember that we have non-durables energy and non-durables non-energy. Non-durables energy have the passenger kilometers, transportation, that are transformed into private and public transportation. And from here we have the consumption of energy for transportation passenger kilometers. We have also the energy in buildings times the comfort. This is the maximum energy requirement for the full comfort. Times the comfort, we have the amount of energy in buildings. Consumption of non-durables minus the consumption of energy in transportation gives the non-energy consumption of non-durables. And then we have the elasticity of the Weiss model, and we split this into the 6 categories. And then we have a link here of food demand that goes to the environmental model, with the land use model. Okay? And all of this is linked to the final demand vector, to the final demand to the consumption vector. It's more or less.
On the calculation of the comforts of household for heating and so on, is considered somehow increases in temperature in climate?
For the comfort, not. But in the energy in buildings, so far it's not included, but it could be. Because here you design, depending on your income, basically, and the price of energy, you decide how much comfort you can afford.
Yeah, but like the optimum one?
This is calculated in the bottom up energy model. Depending on the insulation, the temperature, etc., then you decide if you want to have the 100%, this is how much.
Maybe you have 80 degree days because of the bottom up.
So far it's not included, but could be. For cooling and for heating. So far it's not included because we are developing that now. But that would be very interesting for both for cooling and for heating.
In any case, it would be connected with the environmental module, so this is
relatively easy.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that would be easy. Well, and then finally we have the governance model, that it is basically the system of national accounts. And we have a representation of government revenue, expenditure, and the balance, the sales atlas, and the debt. And these components are linked to the other parts of the model. These are the components that we have in the part of the revenue, taxes on products, taxes on products and subsidies on production, property income, taxes on income wealth, net social contribution and other, and in the part of the revenue, this is total revenue, and the part in the expenditure, subsidies, other taxes and subsidies on production, interest for the debt, social benefits, other current transfer, final consumption expenditure of government, and this goes directly to the column of the input output table of the government consumption. We have also gross fixed capital formation of the government that goes to is part of the gross fixed capital formation in the input output table, another expenditure. Then we have the net lending and the borrowing, and then we have the change in the gross debt and the current debt. Here is the gross debt. We have tax rates on income and wealth for each of the households that are different in most of the countries you have higher tax rates for high income households. It's fully consistent with the government financial accounts and with the financial model, and the parameterization based on data for Eurostat on the OECD and IMF. So this is how it looks like. This is you have some taxes and subsidies rates that you apply to the demand of intermediates, domestic and imports. You have taxes also on the demand of final products, both domestic and import. This is mostly the value-added taxes here. You have also taxes on production, taxes on income, profit, and wealth, and these are the taxes that you are capturing, that are part of the government revenue, together with the social security contribution and are applied to the labor compensation. This is the part of the revenue in every time step, and then for the part of the expenditure, we start with some expectation. The thing is that at the starting of each period, the government fixed a target for the relation between deficit and GDP, and has some expectations on the GDP growth. So basically, it's the GDP growth rate of the previous year. And with this and the rate of GDP, revenue to GDP in the previous year, they calculate the government expenditure. So you have an expectation of the GDP growth, okay? A rule of deficit to GDP, and the relation between revenue and GDP. So this is the total expenditure that you expect to do this year in order to be consistent with the deficit rule. Then you have some variables that are endogenous, like the social benefits, that depends on the unemployed people, retired people, and the social benefit rates. You have also to pay the debt interest, that depends on the debt of the previous year and the interest rate. You have other expenditure that is exogenous. You decide the government investment, and total expenditure minus social benefits, minus debt interest, minus the other things is the government consumption. So first you decide how much you are going to spend. This is something that you don't decide because you have to pay the social benefits that year. You have to pay with the debt interest. You have this investment, and everything except this is what you can expenditure that you can do in a specific year. And this government consumption goes to the final demand together with the government investment. And then you have the government expenditure minus the government revenue. This is the deficit surplus, and this goes to the debt. This is how it works. And then, and just to recap what we have done, so far we have calculated many different parts of the economic model, but to some extent the main indicator that is currently used to see how a specific scenario policy impacts in the economy are the GDP, the gross domestic product, and the gross, and the net domestic product. So how it is calculated? You can calculate from the income approach, from the production approach, and from the expenditure approach. From the income approach, the GDP is calculated, the labor compensation, that is coming from the labor module, the net operating surplus, that is the output minus the consumption of intermediates minus the taxes, the consumption of capital that comes from the investment and capital module, taxes on products and production that comes from the government module, and the taxes of the products of the final demand. This is the gross domestic product, and the net domestic product is everything except the consumption of fixed capital. This is from the income approach. From the production approach, the GDP is output minus intermediate minus taxes of products and final demand. And from the expenditure approach, the GDP is the household consumption, government consumption, expenditure, investment, Chinese inventories, export plus imports. So this is how the GDP is calculated. Then we have a financial model that is still
yeah, I don't want to start a big discussion, but I think there are really important groups missing in the government thing, because they target a certain debt to GDP ratio. but the debt to GDP ratio is obviously impacted by GDP, which is in turn impacted by government spending. So there must be a loop back to expected GDP that is not backward looking. Yes, but that's a period before.
Yes.
But if you spend more, then normally your debt to GDP ratio will not increase but decrease because spending creates GDP growth in the future. So in the next period, so it's very difficult to target the deficit to GDP ratio because your spending and your deficit will change GDP.
But this is something that is exogenous.
Yeah, but that's what I mean, that because it's exogenous, it's not consistent. There's a loop missing. And the second loop that's missing is that your taxes depend on GDP, so your revenue will also be bigger, also lower your deficit to GDP ratio. So I think all I'm saying is that it's not a very realistic way to model the deficit GDP ratio if it's backward looking. It doesn't take into account the effects of the spending. No, that's a feedback.
Can you repeat this feedback, the first one?
Yes.
Again?
If you spend more as a government, you will have higher GDP growth. So your debt to GDP ratio depends on the spending on one hand, but also on the effect on GDP. And here, the deficit to GDP target only depends on your expected GDP in the past. So you do not account for the change in GDP you will have through your increased spending.
Have a lag of 1 year. This is what it means. There is a lag.
The deficit depends on GDP in the past. Because your expected GDP, maybe it's not represented in the diagram, but the expected GDP is adjusted by the GDP in the last year.
Yes, 1 year before.
No, it's even represented there. Yeah, okay.
It's not represented in the
It
diagram.
comes from the past year.
Yeah, okay, that's true.
The problem of the lag is because, well, computational requirements, we need to use the previous GDP, the last year. But it,
Okay, no, you're right, and this was a very stupid comment.
This is not the typical closure rule that we use in other models, but we have adapted this to run in Basic.
Expected GDP depends on real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Normally, in other TG models and in other macroeconomic models, like use of the every time step you use of the model, you don't have those lags. Basically, you have the effective rule, you have all the taxes that you are computing in that year, and then this is something that is completely erroneous, and you fix normally the government transaction. That is consistent with the effective rule of that year. You don't need expectation or whatever. Okay, you use the GDP of this year, that's it. So in the financial model, we have a stock flow consistent approach that so far has been developed for 27 member states. It provides a consistent way of integrating the financial and the real economic spheres. And that it is also something that it is missing in most macroeconomic models and basically in all integrators in the models. Here you have some features of the model. I will not stop here because you have to go this part that I think that it is important. Paula, maybe you can show this slide here. That is something that
Yes, okay, so I'm going to explain how do we approach the modeling of endogenous climate change impacts on the economic model. Just as a starting point, we consider there is a general undervaluation of the damage in integrated assessment models, both in top-down approaches, which are those that apply directly the damage on the GDP on the output variables, and also in the bottom-up approaches, which are more recent, but we consider that there are also other undervaluations, since mainly because modeling all the potential impacts of climate change on the economy is almost impossible. Although there is a high uncertainty between what is going to happen, how climate change is going to damage the economy, let's say that there is like a high inconsistency between what natural scientists are saying and what economists are saying. For example, William Nordhaus, probably you know him, he won a Nobel Prize by his work on damage functions and damage on climate change, from climate change on economy. And he said, he wrote this sentence in a text in 1994, in which he was like, laughing at this debate. He said that climate change is more about apocalypse or only small potatoes, and the issue is that most economies less defend the second part. They say that climate change is only going to affect a little bit our GDP by reduction in productivity or efficiency, whereas natural scientists are saying that an increase in 2 degrees is going to maybe destroy our climate system. So there are a lot of inconsistencies. And this can send wrong messages to policymakers, saying that climate change is maybe not serious enough in terms of economic welfare. But here you can see we in the integrated assessment models usually use what is called a DAMAC function, which is a function that relates a climate change indicator. It should usually is the increase in global average temperature, and this function relates this temperature with a reduction in GDP. And how do we calibrate these functions is the issue. There are a lot of methodologies. So here you can see some of the most famous DAMAC functions in the literature. For example, here the blue is the one proposed by Nordhaus in his model in DICE in 2017, and he says that an increase in temperature of 5 degrees only will cause a reduction in GDP of less than 10%, right? Whereas climate scientists are saying that a 2 degrees increase is going to involve the appearing of tipping points and so on. So more or less you can have an idea of what's the situation. So starting from this point, the main aims of the LOCOMOTION project in these terms are, first of all, to enhance the traditional concept of DAMAC factor by considering more variables, not only GDP, and more hazards, as well as the regional and sectoral disaggregation, 55 regions and 62 sectors. We also propose a detailed representation of the whole causal chain of damage. We don't affect directly to production, we affect to the productive factors and also other parts of the bottom-up models which at the end enter into the economy. And for example, we affect the capital stock and also the labor productivity. And we also capture, since the own structure of the model, we capture as many indirect impacts as possible. And we will also try to represent the effects of adaptation, which is not very assessment models. Here you have the deliverable of a report that has been written in the scope of the LOCOMOTION project, in which we explain more in detail this methodology. So I don't know if you can see it well. No. Okay. Well, I'll try to explain it. This is an influence diagram we use to represent the causal chain of damage. Here we have the temperature change. We have the average temperature change increased by each 35 region. You can see it better? No. Okay. Sorry. So, well, more or less, you can see the different colors, as you can guess. So we have some.
Sorry to interrupt, but you have a live stream on our YouTube channel. So if you want to open the first screen at your laptop, you can do that as well. Although we do have a few seconds delay, so it's a bit.
Okay, well, maybe it can work. Well, I won't stop too much in this part. I just want to comment that well, we have a lot of links. In terms of economy, we have direct links. We consider that these the DAMAC functions that we calibrate from climate using the regional temperature, and we affect the capital stock and also the capital stock productivity, and we affect also the labor productivity. And there are other indirect impacts that occur inside the economic module, such as how a reduction in capital stock can affect the production, and the same with the labor productivity, and other kind of indirect impacts that occur between modules. For example, as you, I think you have a session on the environmental module the next week, and probably they'll tell you that they are also including DAMAC functions on crop yields if temperature increases, the crop yields decrease. This affects food production, and with the links of the bottom-up model, it should be translated into the reduction in the output of the agricultural sector. So we have like different kind of indirect impacts, as you see. And the adaptation would be, on the one hand, an investment of a more public expenditure, and on the other hand, it affects to the damage by reducing the damage. I will come back to this later. And we also have effects of climate change on migrations that will affect population, and it also affects how the labor force increase or decrease in each country depending on these climate migrations that will affect finally also to the production and other economic variables. So to explain this modeling framework from other perspectives, let's say that total impact is the sum of direct impacts, those on capital, stock, and labor productivity so far, and indirect impacts. For calibrating the direct impacts, which are the DAMAC functions we are calibrating, we have generated a database through literature review of regional and sectoral estimates, and we have calibrated so far DAMAC functions on capital stock and on labor productivity. We have included also, for the case of capital, I will explain it after, some uncertainty scenarios, because we are using impact estimates of literature, which are retrieved from other models, and these climate models used usually are not deterministic. There are a lot of uncertainty, so we are considering this uncertainty into the estimates. I mean, you can, for a level of temperature, you do not have one impact level. You can, depending on the uncertainty, you can have a maximum estimate, a minimum estimate. So with those statistical data, we are considering uncertainty scenarios. And as we cannot, it's very difficult to find data for our sectoral disaggregation for the 35 regions and the 62 sectors. We have developed a methodology, a qualitative methodology. If someone is interested, I can show you after about which consists on vulnerability matrices. So we consider if, for example, a sector for which we do not have data, we consider that it's enough vulnerable that other sector we can extrapolate the DAMAC functions since they are relative. For example, if we have a DAMAC function for the mining sectors but not for the energy sector, let's assume we can see through our vulnerability matrices that those sectors are same vulnerable to climate change. We consider that we extrapolate those data. And regarding indirect impacts, as I said before, we have two kinds of indirect impacts. Those that are guaranteed by the structure of the model. For that, we need a consistent translation from biophysical and socio-demographic impacts that occur in social and environmental modules into economic impacts. And on the other hand, inside the economic module, we account for interrelationships between economic impacts through the whole structure of the module, and also the input-output tables. For example, through the import and export, the trade market, there are this translation of impacts between regions and between sectors. Well, this is only a kind of qualitative consistency check that we want to keep in mind to always, once we apply some impacts, to see if the model is capturing well the damage we consider, to not to, as other models we said before, to not to fail in sending wrong messages to policy makers. And adaptation, as I'm going to explain now, it will affect directly the DAMAC functions. And for that, we have generated a database of sectoral and regional adaptation measures, costs and benefits, to calibrate these adaptation parameters. Okay, another slide more about the methodology. So we can define, as the PSS framework says, impact, the direct impact can be defined as the multiplication of vulnerability, hazard, and exposure. A hazard would be the phenomena that causes the damage. In the model, we have a more or less simple climate model, so we do not have extreme weather events model. So we are using regional temperature increase as a proxy of a lot of hazards. We are considering different functions for different hazards, but always using the temperature as a proxy. And the exposure would be, in the case of the William model, the variable affected. For example, the capital stocks would be the exposure, and the vulnerability is the damage function. As you can see here, we would apply the damage functions that depends on the hazard on the exposure, and then we would have the direct impacts on capital stock. And after, the indirect impact will depend on the rest of interrelationships in the model. So then, at the end of a time series, we can see the total effect on capital stock that will not be the same as the direct effect. And the adaptation works in that way, reducing the slope of the damage function. So, from the one hand, it's an investment, and when that investment occurs, we have to calibrate some regional and sectoral parameters to reduce the slope of the damage function. So, as I said before, for the time being, we have these two damage functions directly applied in the economic module. It is not implemented yet in the current version of William, but we have made some tests with this in a partial version of William, and I would like to show you. I don't know if I can. Okay, let's see if it works. Okay.
Run Medeas?
No, it's a partial version of William.
But you didn't see him there.
It's not fencing there.
I don't think so. So this is the reason. Maybe you can use my computer or your computer.
Mine, but I am not. I mean,
No,
there is
you
like a
can
recording.
do the session. Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect.
You can, Luca, maybe you can send an email to Paola to connect the session online. We have the email from Paola. Luca, can you send an email to Paola to connect? This is being recorded, isn't it, online?
I have a question about the previous topic. I don't know if I will be able to explain, because you have explained mostly like the connections that the monetary system is generating in the economy, and I guess that there are some this elasticity, I don't know the name, but the consumption will be driven by the price, but this price is also connected to the physical like reality, like food or energy, and there's this energy and transportation system. But I was wondering if households decide that they are going to spend some money on something, and this money is translated in a quantity of food, for example. Do you check if this quantity of food is enough?
Enough for what? The available basic needs.
If that's enough for the family to like survive.
In theory, this is something that is calculated in the land use model. But
Sorry, I was.
they are going to show the land use model.
Yes, but the thing is, on Tuesday.
Tuesday they are going to show how the food, or how the diets are calculated.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's really in the function, like when you decide, like when the household is spending maybe
10% of the income on food, 10% on something else, tax-wise and so on. If that 10% is enough to fulfill the basic needs, that's what you mean, right?
Because maybe if that is not enough, the elasticity changes, right? Or they are.
No, the elasticity is fixed.
Yeah.
We have in the price elasticities the effects of the different goods that you have in your demand system. It means that food is a basic need, and the parameter that you will obtain to some extent will guarantee that the consumption of the household will be enough. But I mean, you have to test it.
The problem is if we have physical scarcity, I mean, if at the worldwide level there is not enough, then you have to kill the demand. So probably you are going to, the people, low income household, they are going to spend a lot, but that's not a guarantee that the dietary requirements are satisfied because you have physical constraints. That ideally we will have a price feedback between what is going on, like the one that we have in the materials module. See, because in the materials module we have something similar. We have a supply, and in the supply is households, and that keeps the demand. Ideally, with the diet, with the food, we would also have something similar. So far we don't have, but ideally would be the logic will be more or less similar.
What is worth the feedback when there's not neither the household can afford the food, even though the price is rising, they cannot afford the food, or we run out of food. Does it have feedback as well?
As well, we should have as well. This is something that we have been already discussing: how the diets affect the health and the population.
Then there could, I mean, let's say for elasticities, then we should decrease the number of population, which decreases the number of households.
And you're already there.
I think there's a lot of delay because I'm doing some things and they appear even a minute after, but that's.
It's the connection. I mean,
it's right. I changed my view and it doesn't appear there.
There's a delay to the connection.
Okay.
It will work.
I wait. Okay. And what I want to show is just a very partial version of William we built. So we, a colleague of mine and me, for her final project of her degree, and we applied this gamma function on a very simple version of William with only the investment module. I mean, the only endogenous demand is the investment, the rest of them are exogenous. And we explained that the scarcity will appear through prices by killing demand. But in this case, we are doing a very rough mechanism in which, since we do not have prices, what we have is the following. You can see my screen. The climate change damage appears as an outflow of the capital stock. The capital stock has an inflow, which is the investment, the outflow of the depreciation, and natural capital depreciation. And the climate change acts in the same way, by extracting capital stock. So, in this version, the capital stock and the capital productivity determines an output real maximum, the maximum production that a sector can have. So, when this and when we do not have prices, is to constrain directly the production. So you cannot produce never up to the maximum production. Okay, and we apply the same constraint to the demand to guarantee consistency, and the demand is never up to the production. So, how have we modeled these climate change damages? We have a very simple, well, we can, it's a kind of debate. I have here a switch. I think Oli also uses these switches, so maybe you've explained yesterday. We can use this switch to activate or disactivate the damage. And we have modeled here a very simple impact module in which we modelize the temperature as following. Depending on GDP, we have modelized a very simple, in a very simple way, the CO2 emissions with an intensity of CO2, a ratio in CO2 GDP, which is exogenous, and we calculate the cumulative CO2 emissions. Depending on this stock of cumulative CO2 emissions, we calculate the temperature with this exogenous parameter, which is the, I don't know what's the name, like a sensibility of the temperature depending on
response.
Yes,
Temperature climate response.
exactly, temperature climate response. And then we calculate the regional average temperature increase with a linear extrapolation with some coefficients that have been calculated in the scope of the LOCOMOTION model. And then we here modelize the damage function. We have damage functions for different hazards. As I said, we have the temperature as a proxy, but we can use the temperature as an explanatory variable of different hazards. And we have a damage function for heat waves, for fires, for droughts, and different uncertainty scenarios. We could introduce as stochastic functions, but for the time being, we are only introducing different functions or different calibrated by different statistical indicators. And we also have differentiation by regions and by sectors. So here we have a switch that allows to define which hazard you want to activate. You can activate all the hazards because we consider that they are independent among them. So we can sum the damage and the uncertainty scenario. Okay, and then this the final damage function enters here in the capital set. The next indirect impact that we can see is that when as I said, when the output real maximum is reached, it constrains the real output. Okay, so when it happens, for example, in a sector in a region, if that region or sector cannot produce through the intermediate inputs market, this damage will be translated to the rest of the sectors. Okay, so just some preliminary results we have. Let's start. Stop saving. I will come back. Now I have to say this.
Yes, screen.
Okay.
Max, what did you share the screen? Yes.
Okay. So just to finish this part.
But now it's visually.
It's okay.
No.
So some preliminary results we have. Doing the modeling like this, traditional damage function can emerge because we can observe final effects on GDP since everything is connected. Capital stock affects production, and on the basis of production we calculate GDP. So what we have observed, which is preliminary results, but I think it's interesting. You have here the different discontinuous functions depending on different scenarios. The red one is with the maximum estimates, and the minimum. The green one is with the minimum estimates, and here we have with the median. What happens? And the other here this function is the one of Nordhaus, and this one is of Wakeman. What have we observed, which is very interesting? When the damages are not on capital are not big enough to constrain production, we can have benefits in terms of economic benefits. Why? Because when damage cannot constrain production because the capital is decreasing, but you still can produce, so the next year you will want to invest more. Okay? So we observe a boost in the investment. But when damages are enough big to constrain production, then the next year you don't want to invest more because the companies see their production lows, so they don't want to invest more. So then is when we start to see damages. So here you can see this shape of the function with some benefits at the beginning, and after we see high damages. And with the scenario of minimum, we always see benefits because we never have enough damages to reach that maximum production, that constraint. So in any case, we have to share that only applying very specific climate change impacts on capital stock, we are only representing climate change impacts from some extreme weather events on some infrastructures. We are not considering tipping points, scarcity of production, scarcity of water, level productivity damages. We are only considering damages on infrastructure, and even though we, in the maximum scenario, we have higher damages than some of the most famous damage functions that try to capture the whole climate change damage on economy. So I think it's a very interesting starting point. And that's all from myself.
I think that is all the best. Yes, I could some concluding remarks.
Okay.
Some takeaway messages regarding the economic module. First of all, especially compared to the models, I would like to highlight that they have a quite detailed representation of the economy in terms of industries, countries, and households. That is quite relevant. We have also had integration between economy, energy, materials, mass, climate, and demographics. So it's a fully true integrated assessment model. We have paid special attention to the assessment of the biophysical limits in terms of climate change. So mentioned and in terms of resources, and all these things allow us to assess the socioeconomic impacts of climate change scenarios and policies. And finally, I think that we have made a step forward compared to other macroeconomic and integrated assessment models. And I think that it is all from my side, and maybe we can, yes, there's a question there.
About the allocation parameter,
we have not calibrated them so far. We have a database of information. For example, we have maybe you can explain it better because you have done it in BCP, but there's like a database, right, on cost-benefit ratios that will allow to adjust those parameters, but it's still not done. It's a step forward.
That is a database that it is. I think that it is publicly available.
Yeah.
You have in the level 4.7, you have the description of the database and also the link where you can download both the data and adaptation, basically a literature review. When we started from different papers and also from great literature, we extracted costs and benefits of adaptation from different studies, different sectors and regions, and there are a lot of things there. And also the part of the cost of climate change impacts are also there in the database.
Yes. Because I have looked at the scenarios and we were not, we didn't work on the adaptation because it also depends on the scenarios. I understand that you will database, but after on the parameter you choose depends on the scenarios.
Yeah, I don't know if adaptation is going to be endogenous, depending on public expenditure, maybe.
It could be both exogenous or endogenous.
But I'm not sure if it can be in specific scenarios, because we have not.
Because it depends, like the adaptation.
Sorry?
The
the adaptation scenarios that would be on which approach you choose. Like
Yeah.
neighbors.
Yeah, I think it should, but I
Yes.
don't know if we are.
I believe that is something that should be linked
Yeah,
to the specific scenarios.
because we didn't work on that in the organization.
More questions?
Yes, how many people are in the group? How many people are in the group developing this?
In the economic module?
Yeah.
Right now in BC3, Manuel and myself, before there was another guy, Mikel, he was the one that estimated the trade and labor, the trade elasticities of the labor part. This in BC3. Then there is good graphic from CISA, an institute in Austria. And then the team in Valladolid, mainly Paula, and Luis. And then in Pisa, Guillermo, before Andre, and Simone. Pisa, more or less, is at the...
Jaime was working at the beginning in the reports.
Jaime was working at the beginning.
Jaime, you know?
Yes.
Was working in, also in this team.
Yes.
At the beginning.
Congratulations.
Let's see, because so far, it's, I mean, our baby is still in the oven. In any case, all of you are invited to contribute. We have already been discussing things that can be improved, etc. So we are very open to hear your opinions. And if you want to contribute to one part of the model, at the end of the project will be open source. Everyone can develop different models and we can share it. That will be fantastic.
Yes, it's important. I mentioned at the beginning of the course, and remember that anybody that has an idea how to improve, if anyone wants to collaborate, of course, we are completely open. And anyway, it will be an open source, so even you can do by yourself without just keeping in mind that it has to develop here, but the purpose of the project is just to contribute to the general, let's say, profit of the academia, but obviously to the society. So it's free for everybody, of course.
If you can change to the previous slide with the video.
Yes.
This is not available yet, right?
No, it's very, very late.
No, but I was thinking that somehow I don't know how this you make this, but I have this impression that I'm asking this, I'm gonna generate that and then okay, so we are kind of in the 1.4, so we are increasing the GDP. Sorry? Like, see, in the first part of the government increase, you have this increasing GDP because it's like, you still can produce stuff and you need to solve all the problems that climate change has generated. But this is taking, like, this increasing GDP is likely to get you faster to the worst part, right? To the 2.4 and in the end get
maybe because you increase the emissions and then it's what you need. Yeah, it can be. I don't know, because there are like a lot of the dynamics inside.
Yeah.
Actually, this is the consequence of, as you have seen, a lot of demand functions bottom up implemented in all the sectors. So there's a lot of dynamics. It could be a reason, yes.
Do you find that appropriate these results, taking the maximum of the 4 degrees, 8% of increase on GDP?
What do you mean by appropriate?
Do you think it's realistic?
No.
Just the technical and stuff.
Yeah, it's just one part of the damage. It's not all the damage.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you mean that it should be worse?
I'm asking you.
Okay, I don't know, but I think it's logic of only implementing damages on infrastructures. If you have a lot of damages in a lot of infrastructure and you cannot have the enough liquidity or money to recover, you are lost.
There is another thing here, that gross domestic product is not the best measure to measure the impact. Net domestic product takes outside of the equation the consumption of this capital and damage. This is the good measure, because part of the losses are making a positive effect in the gross domestic product. I wanted to ask something to you. In the transient climate response parameter is fixed.
Yeah.
Because
It's,
you have a
it's
lot
a very
of
simple model.
but you have a lot of
climate
uncertainty there.
Yeah, you know,
I
the
mean,
climate model it cannot be possible.
But in my opinion, I mean, I think that probably you are not going to have a level of emission that allows you to go to 3.5, 3.9. Basically, because you are going to have, before you are going to have damage, that is going to reduce the GDP and it's going to reduce the emissions. I don't know to what extent this is already captured. So, I mean, if you are in here, for instance, if you are in a 2.4 degrees temperature increase,
yes,
you are going to hurt the economy, and you are going to reduce the emissions.
Yes.
You are reducing this, and you are going to, if you reduce the emissions, probably you are not going into the 3.9.
Yes, this is captured because it's endogenous. If you reduce your GDP, you reduce your emissions.
Well, here it could be the case because you are only,
not even,
here basically it's because you are only taking part of the story, but I don't think that following the list, and also taking into account resource constraints.
yeah. Actually, we have 2 ways of implementing the damages. We consider that we can do it endogenously, and we also are implementing exogenous scenarios of temperature increase based on SSP, only to see what happens at high levels of temperature when we do not have because endogenously maybe it happens what you say. I do not remember if maybe we have extracted this figure from the activating the exogenous increases in temperature.
I think that's
to see those.
In our model, when we run a baseline scenario, with any policy, etc., I don't think that we are going to get this from the list.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Because we are going to lack emissions both because of the feedback with the climate and
Yeah.
also because of the conservation resources in fossil fuels. But if you have a transient climate response high, you have in the part of the transient climate response is the emissions, but also the feedbacks. And read the feedback or whatever, then you can have higher temperatures. But in the mean parameter, we are not going to find probably these those scenarios. You are running the model there until 2050. 2050?
Yes.
Are you get 4 degrees in 2050?
Yes, because I think we for seeing this, we consider exogenous temperature scenarios to see what happens at high levels of temperature.
Because I mean.
Yes.
Okay.
And is it possible for me to improve your impacts?
Yes, it's the idea.
This year, for the Stern review of 2006 said that the loss of GDP of an action, the loss of an action contributing GDP is from 5 to 20%, which means that there are a big part missing here.
Yes. Also, this is only impact on infrastructure. Yes. Even though we are only considering infrastructures, we will obtain higher damages than the Northern expansion that tries to consider the whole market impact. So, I mean, we have to consider these results in context. It is only a part of the impact, very specific. I do not want to send a message that this is the total damage on GDP due to climate. Only from infrastructures destruction. So I think it's time to lunch. Maybe
we can stop for lunch now, but if anyone has another question, we can have questions for minute or two, but if not, we can stop here.
Maybe after I can show how the model looks in the sim and after we start with that.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
No, ya le voy a decir que